And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, you know, planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. But these drones are continuing to swarm over New Jersey, New York, and now we're getting UFO reports as far away as California and Oregon by pilots, and then people on the ground from Maryland to Connecticut. So now we're getting into the full spread, and that's what we're getting into tonight, which is Dark Journalist X Series 181. This one's important. This is Apotheum Nation, and it's COG drone operation Takeover, the UFO file right in the heart of it all. And as we can see, the dry run for a kind of a massive UFO event is taking place right before our eyes. We've never seen anything like this ever take place. And this is putting us on a different level already. One of the things that I was talking, I went on the Alex Jones show today. We had a great time, and we had a huge audience. We had 3 million viewers. And I want to announce now that I'm going to be hosting a segment for Alex next week. It's on Thursday, and it will be 1 o'clock Central. So that's 2 o'clock Eastern. And I'll do a couple of hours, and boy, I'm going to really get a lot in there while the InfoWars people are watching in that great audience. And it was really great to see Alex again. Of course, Alex knows a great deal about these subjects, interestingly enough, but after tracking the government and the deep state for so long, that element of the advanced technology in the background now is becoming much more to the surface. And a lot of the knowledge that he has on these things is coming forward as well. So we're doing some very kind of interesting crossover there. I love going on the show with Alex, and Alex knows a lot about the topic and was very gracious. So we had a great time on there. What a fantastic audience and great feedback from all of you. And I'm happy to report to the ideas room here that there's so many people that are awakening to the idea that this advanced technology in the background and the wall of secrecy that's involved with it is corrosive. And we need to get to the bottom of it if we're ever to get a full free society back. And in the meantime, we're completely under siege while we're in this transition period with a weakened administration on the way out and the Trump administration not quite in until January 20th. So there's a kind of a period there, a vacuum of power. And this other thing, this kind of extraterritorial force seems to be moving in and testing things out. And as we know, we've done a lot of reporting on the continuity of government COG program here. This is very interesting because the continuity of government program only really comes to light in full blossom in the work of Professor Peter Dale Scott. And that's where I learned so much of it. And then what I did was I applied that knowledge around the continuity of government and try to see how it crisscrossed with the secret space program development and that secret space architecture and the whole infrastructure that was, you know, they were able to create this whole program in space without anyone knowing anything about it and dropping out of the moon program since 1972, which is absurd. So here we've been, 52 years later, waiting for them to kind of re-embark on a real space program. And they were supposed to land people on the moon this fall. It didn't happen. And so they have this whole Artemis program now. And it's like, hey, it's been 52 years. Where have you been with all the technology? Well, you've been in the heart of the secret space program. That level of secrecy applied to space, along with the continuity of government, which includes large-scale underground bases in the United States and around the world, leads to a serious schizophrenic situation for the average person on the ground. And you have two major secret structures on overdrive, COG and SSP. And in the middle of it, guess what? The UFO file. So you're in a very interesting trajectory here. And as we get into the end of the year, with what happened now with these drone incursions and the drone swarms that are happening, we're in a different ballpark with this. Now the kind of, the UFO people who were bending the knee to the CIA narrative are now, it's out because none of what they were saying makes any sense. And their whole thing about a UFO threat and them saying, oh, no, they'd never pull that, we'd never get a false CIA UFO threat, but there might be a real threat from aliens out there. No, we can see them with absolute breakaway drone tech going on here. What they're doing is they're creating the kind of panic level of floating these anonymous things over entirely populated metropolitan areas with no explanations. And you have John Kirby sidling out there, the spokesman at the Pentagon, saying absolutely ridiculous things that, oh, we don't know what they are, but they seem to be operating legally, and all the things that people are saying about drones aren't true. It's not happening. So we don't believe that. You know, he's kind of shilling for the administration there on their way out. I don't believe anything that they have to say. But it is all very, very strange nonetheless. And there's a number of explanations for what's taking place. In my opinion, what's actually what we're seeing on the ground with this is they are data mining and testing the public with a large scale overflights of these drones, and they're seeing how the public reacts to a threat from above, which is something that's been core to their plan with the idea of a UFO threat narrative out of the CIA, NGA, and NRO apparatus. They've been creating this now. They've had it under works for 80 years, and one of the outcomes that they can get from a genuine UFO emergency that takes place is they get the ability to ramp up emergency powers and ultimately trigger continuity of government. So, you know, this in itself, there's a whole thing about these scientists that get together, you know, every 6 months or so, and they figure out how close on the nuclear clock we are to nuclear Armageddon and things like that. And thank God that clock goes down sometimes as much as it goes forward. But once in a while, when things ratchet up, that thing gets really close. Well, I want you to think about this in terms of the COG around the UFO threat thing. The hand of the clock moved rapidly on this one. And so, you know, we're in a kind of a different trajectory. And a lot of the kind of BS narratives around the UFO field about trusting the CIA and, you know, the CIA has your best interests at heart and all these counterintelligence people before Congress are being straight with the public completely goes out the window, because here literally is the UFO threat narrative emergency powers test. And whether that test goes live is what we're seeing and what we're going to look for on the ground. We're going to get into all of it tonight. Our special Dark Journalist X Series episode 181 on the heels of doing the Alex Show, which was a fantastic experience. I want to remind everyone that we will, in fact, take your questions tonight in the second half of the program. Miss Olivia is putting all those together right now. And before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
The Bikini Truther said Alex called you his best guest ever.
He was fantastic. You got to understand that, you know, I view Alex as kind of the architect of transparency, and he's been working in these deep narratives and in these deep worlds on a number of different stories over the years, and he's really been there as that kind of central figure in all of it. And he's taken a lot of heat, as we know as well, from government agencies and from you know, all these lawsuits and things. And they've really tried to stifle what he's done. But it's an extraordinary thing to see, you know, the fact that he's sort of, you know, I think about it in musical terms, you know, so much of the musical world goes back to the 1950s and all that, you know, like Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley and all this kind of stuff created the music scene. And then all this stuff came after it. You know, so what I think about with Alex is he's sort of the original, he's one of the originators of alternative media. And he's very informed. I'm not even sure that his political reporting allows him to go as deep into esoteric subjects as he would like, but there's a lot to work with there. And it's quite possible that I'll end up interviewing him at some point and getting some of that on the record, because there is a deeper side, I'm telling you right now, with Alex. So, but what a blast it was. And I'm looking forward to guest hosting there next week. I'll bring a lot of things forward from the X series on that show. I also want to remind you, if you're new here especially, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter that we send out once a week, just letting you know about the incredible episodes of the X series that we have coming up for you. Mind-blowing episodes and interviews, topics, documentaries, incredible documentaries. We just put out JFK, The Final Speech, which is an incredible overview of his meeting with Lloyd Berkner, who was the head of the UFO file, and that he was going to meet him at the Trade Mart. That's where he was headed when he got assassinated, in fact, for a major announcement. That entire documentary is available for free on this channel, an hour, over 90 minutes there, and it's absolutely incredible, and it has all this information relating to Antarctica and the UFO file. Highly recommend it, and we have that available for you. Incredible interviews coming up. It's all there in the free newsletter right at darkjournalist.com. Make sure you go ahead and sign up for that experience. Stand up and be counted. Now, I'm going to get into a lot of the news stories that are floating around and a lot of the explanations for this thing, and then I'm going to show you what is going on in the background of the actual COG Northcom commander, who is General Gio. He's the person who would take over as the COG Continuity of Government Combatant Commander of the United States. He'd be the total thing. The president would be out. And this guy appoints regional governors. This is the way COG works. And the regional governors take over, the eastern zone. And this guy gets the western zone and the Midwest and the breadbasket, So they break up these zones. And then the idea is, we'll let the emergency pass and then we'll stage elections again. Well, we know that doesn't always work out very well. And so COG has been building up and building up. We've kept an eye on it. And it's been one of the most important things on this program. We've made a promise to you to keep a very close eye on the false narrative coming out of the intelligence community relating to a UFO threat narrative to trigger emergency powers. And so here we are in the middle of the drone swarm. I'll deal with the drone swarm in two ways. I'm going to deal with it on the face value version of it that we have out there in the media, up to date, as of 8:30 when we came on air. And then I'm going to show you what's been going on in the background for the last couple of months with the combatant commander hosting these drone swarm tests against UAP. And this is the nature of those drills. And that is Operation Homeland Synchronizer. You're hearing about it here maybe for the first time, but it's very important to the drone swarm stuff we see going on here. And of course, late breaking news that the Space Force may be involved in this as well. We're going to get into all of it. And I'll start with these articles and the comments now by President Trump as well. But before I do, the temperature, Miss Olivia.
People are so excited. Amber O'Neill says, I have literally been dying to see what DJ thinks about this because they are wasting no time with this UFO operation. I feel like it's really happening. And Ray Story wants to know, why can't the military stop a simple drone?
Oh, they could. They have protocols. Look, the whole explanation on the official side is absurd. They have protocols in place for what happens when a drone enters airspace. First of all, if you're a plane and you're not giving the proper response to the FAA air flight controllers, then they send up escorts to take you down. That's just the way that it goes. Now, in some parts of the country, there are restrictions on shooting down drones, but they have ways of disabling them that don't directly involve shooting them down. And they say, well, over a populated area, it could be dangerous. Some of the wreckage could land on a car. But that's all very flimsy, very, very surface level excuses. They have multiple ways and they have so many protocols. You cannot, even get anything in the air without these people knowing exactly what's going on. And the whole NORAD scanning of the skies is 24/7. There's never any let up because you're obviously in a nuclear situation. You even have doomsday bombers in the air ready to respond to all of that. So this idea that it snuck through our, sensors and we don't know who's operating and all that, that's all lies. Those are flat out lies being told directly by this administration. And it's highly disturbing. And the incoming administration thinks so as well. So this is what we'll start with. President-elect Trump weighs in on mysterious drones and as the public demands answers. Now, this call to action is he's telling this administration, look, these drones all over the place and you don't know what they are, I don't believe it. So he put out on Truth Social his comment saying, if you're not going to tell the public what they are, then shoot them down. So it's one or the other, and he's absolutely right. He's made the point there, and it's a really good point. So that's how you would act as commander-in-chief. You have a number of things that are in the sky. Now, this guy, Kirby, going to the podium and saying there's nothing going on is ridiculous. You have people who are saying, hey, it sounded like, it sounds like there are motorcycles landing on my roof. I mean, this is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. And even though the Chinese balloon from last year, which was very unusual, didn't carry the weight of these incredible swarms that are unidentified. And they've been rerouting flight plans around that part of New Jersey. A lot of the residents there are giving us the truth on the ground, while the media went completely stiff on this and the administration went stiff on it. Now you see some stories breaking out in certain corners, like Fox News and other mainstream places where they're finally addressing this. But it is absurd. Now we also have, there's been a large split in the first few days of these drone sightings, and it was all, at first it was Republican congressmen or Republican governors calling it out. Now it's Democrats and Republicans. So the only thing hanging out there in the middle, not giving us any answers, are the FBI, DHS, whose comment was absolutely ridiculous. You have over 250,000 employees at DHS, and you can't find a better thing to say than, well, we don't know what it is. I mean, it's ridiculous. Of course they know what it is, and my guess is that they're operating it and that it's a large-scale test to the public, but we'll get into how that works. Let's get into some of those officials and what they've had to say, along with the location of the drones and how that drone pattern now is expanding, and now it's starting to include genuine UFO sightings on the West Coast. This is the strangeness going on here. Now, I want to say this also, which is the inclusion of the continuity of government NORTHCOM commanders. And there's a retired one who's been writing articles recently. That's Van Herk, who has a huge UFO connection from the 509th Bomber Group. And General Guillo, who also has a huge UFO file connection out of Fort McDill in Florida, which has a huge, unusual UFO history, along with the Space Force Commander Chance, who came out of the base in Montana where they had the nuclear incident where this UFO hovered over the base and just, shut down their nuclear capability missiles. And that guy spent 6 years there. So you have all of these guys have this fingerprint of this UFO file aspect. All right, so here are the basics on some of these. U.S. Senator joins drone hunt as UFO sightings continue. U.S. Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey, he's the senator from New Jersey, expressed security concerns and more as more and more unexplained drone sightings are reported in New Jersey and beyond. Now that's Kim. He's a senator from that state demanding answers. They're not giving it to him. And we already know that Governor Murphy, who I think is, a real Democrat plant, of course, but he also has been giving very glib answers like, we don't know what they are, but we do want the answers, which is absurd. But I think the senator is really getting to the heart of things. So Kim is getting into this. U.S. Senator Andy Kim, who posted on his Twitter account Friday a video he took of swarms of mysterious drones that have been spotted nightly during the past few weeks, said he was increasingly concerned about the unexplained phenomena. Kim, who joined local police in rural Clinton Township, New Jersey, 36 miles north of Trenton, said he spotted small clusters of 2 to 4 drones a number of times throughout the evening. We often saw, quote, we often saw about 5 to 7 lights at a time that were low and not associated with aircraft. We could see on the tracker app, Kim said, noting that the group used a flight tracker app to distinguish the drones from airplanes. Some hovered while others moved across the horizon. So the hovering is also, they're demonstrating some advanced technology here as well. Kim said police have tried to get close to the drones using helicopters, but when approached, the drones would turn off their lights and go dark, echoing a statement by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy on Monday. Quote, this has gone on for weeks. Kim wrote, it's hard to understand how with the technology we have, we aren't able to track these devices and determine the origin. Now, look, if you are seeing something in the United States that flies around with impunity anywhere it wants to, hovers even over military bases, somebody has orders not to shoot it down, not to escort it down, not to take it down. So they're not explaining why they are using these tactics and why they are not escorting it down. So they're lying. That's a problem. That's a very dangerous situation immediately when the Pentagon is lying barefaced. And when they say, have you told President Biden about this? And said, oh, yeah, he's aware of the situation. So that whole administration on the way out, this weakened administration, is giving us a complete falsehood cover story. But then it's also easily debunkable, where you even now have public officials who are seeing this, along with witnesses on the ground. You have Congress people, governors, and senators, etc. So why would you keep on with the lies that this isn't happening when it is? Represents a very dangerous arc of this as it explodes. Meanwhile, eyewitnesses are pushing back against government claims that the drones pose no threat to communities or infrastructure. The growing story has spread to New York, Maryland, and Connecticut. I just looked at some videos from Connecticut before we started tonight, and they are strange. We're going to see them here in Boston. I guarantee you. I hope not. While new reports of car-sized UFOs were registered in California and now parts of Europe. Look, they came out with a story. There's a weird setup to all this. They came out with a story in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year saying, oh, you know what? There was a major drone swarm over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia last Christmas. And, oh, there was, 14 drone sightings a day for multiple days, and it happened for, 15 days. Now, I will tell you this. That story floated around, and they had the original COG commander who retired, Van Herk, giving all the commentary, and they were responding to him and acting like he was the current commander, even though the article just came out in October. This was very strange. And they were like, the COG commander is telling us all about these drone swarms. Now, nothing can swarm over a military base in Virginia, without getting shot at, grabbed, taken down, whatever. So this whole idea that there are just drones hanging out there and they can't do anything about it is absolutely absurd. That was the first absurdity that grew in the middle of all this. Immediately after the election, they had the phony UFO hearings where they announced this immaculate constellation. Nobody even pays attention to that because it's such a joke now. And all that false presentation and testimony based on Schellenberger, who got an anonymous tip from 12, CIA guys, that doesn't mean anything. It's all third-hand knowledge, and they created a fake name for this whole thing. So that was strange. But meanwhile, while they had that distraction going on in Congress, and it did raise at least the subject of the UFO file, a very interesting thing was happening with the actual COG commander, General Guillot. General Guillot had set up a massive test, which was called Operation Homeland Synchronizer. This thing somehow slipped under the radar, and it was going on, and it was taking place in a place called Agony Hill. How do you like that? Over there in Colorado. And then they moved the test. They even did some of the testing in Canada as well. And then they went into the Western Defense Structure, WDS, and they ran the same test there. The test included drone swarms versus UAP. So you have UAPs coming in, you have drone swarms, and you have to defend against both. That's what was going on. And then, right in the middle of all this activity, we had a very unusual thing. The retired COG commander wrote an article, again, in the Wall Street Journal, a highly reputable publication. And here is Van Herk writing, "The U.S. Homeland stands unguarded." That's November 28th. And there's a whole thing in there about how, we couldn't defend against drones, like this situation is off the hook. The Pentagon needs to modernize its plans. This is all very, very unusual activity. Next up, we have General Guillot himself, as I said, running Operation Homeland Synthesizer. Now, this operation is very important because since it's already been taking place, now we're seeing what looks like the test. I'm starting to be reminded of when they run drills before these major deep events in history. For example, 9/11 is the best example. When they were running on that day, they were running these incredible drills having to do with terrorists flying planes into buildings in New York City. Well, there was actually a drill taking place in New York City that morning. when the planes were flying in to actually do it. And it's very interesting because one of the things and one of the principles that I got from Professor Scott was this idea that you have an actual operation or a drill or a test going on, and then the other thing coming in from this covert station comes in and piggybacks on top of the drill test operation and performs all these other things. And so the piggyback here, just like in the case of the Kennedy assassination, that's one of those deep events also where, you could have had something going on, which was they were watching and monitoring a certain group that was planning to assassinate the president, and then they installed the real thing by people who could actually do it, and then they left the people, hanging who were just there and were attempting to do this, but wouldn't have ever had a chance around the national security Secret Service apparatus. So we have to kind of take into account that these drills were happening. They are a telltale sign. Very often when you see mass shootings and things, there are drills the day before for how to handle a mass shooting, using local law enforcement. It's a weird telltale, and it's a dark place to go with it, but certainly this is exactly what happens. Now I'm going to read you a little bit about this test, and then we're going to see how it relates to all of these major drone swarms going on throughout New Jersey and now spreading to New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and genuine UFO sightings by pilots in Oregon and California. All right here in this special episode of Dark Journalists X Series 181. This is UFO Apotheum Nation. This is the COG drone operation Takeover. And the actual name, again, for the test, Homeland Synchronizer. Now, how are you doing out there before
Great.
I jump in?
You want a question?
Sure.
Ray Story said, how can a drone evade one of the F-16s from the Air National Guard in Egg Harbor, New Jersey?
No, it's not possible. None of the drones could evade anything. We have a massive air defense system that you can't, like I said, it's just like when they came out with the original thing about 9/11 and they said, the Pentagon got hit, this plane came in and we didn't know what to do. Look, the reason that the official story around 9/11 is so terrible and there's such a lie is because around the Pentagon, they have rules. If you bicycle too close to the Pentagon, you get grabbed. That's all there is to it. There's no way you can fly a plane into the Pentagon. It doesn't happen. And no one actually saw a plane fly into the Pentagon. And as we know, by most accounts, it was a missile that hit the Pentagon on 9/11. Now, it's very interesting because there were a lot of things. There were a lot of breaches there as well, including this defense secretary carrying people out on a stretcher in front of the Pentagon. Absolutely absurd. They have protocols in place where Donald Rumsfeld, who was involved in setting up COG in the 80s and in the Bush administration in the 2000s, they have protocols against that. So whenever you see these things that don't add up on the surface, there's a reason. You can't let the Secretary of Defense out there in the middle of a defense, a terrorist attack on the lawn of the Pentagon with a stretcher. This doesn't happen. So let's look a little bit into these drone hunter tests, which involved General Gio setting up these tests of UAP versus drone swarm and what would happen. And we'll come around to the UFO aspect as we get into it, because there's a major UFO theme, even though we are seeing so much, kind of drone tech on top. What we're dealing with is the skies, and that's the key in all this. All right. So this was featured in Defense One. By all indications, SUAS will present a safety and security risk to military installations and other critical infrastructure for the foreseeable future, said Northcom Commander General Gio. Fort Carson, Colorado, hovering hundreds of yards away, a small quadcopter drone was nearly visible to the naked eye, but its size didn't make it any less of a potential threat to operations on the ground here. Spotted by sensors, defending personnel dispatched their own drone, this one armed with a net. A few minutes later, in the Colorado air, the friendly drone snagged the interloper, popped a parachute and both floated harmlessly to the ground. The incident at this time was not a real threat, but a demonstration, part of a series put on by U.S. Northern Command, NORTHCOM, to explore ways to counter small unmanned aerial systems, UAS, an increasingly ubiquitous presence not only in the battlefields of Ukraine and the Middle East, but lurking around American bases back home. The Pentagon has documented hundreds of suspected drone incursions at military facilities in the last few years, even if many are thought to be the work of hobbyists. All right, so here's the thing. If you're a hobbyist and you fly something over the Pentagon with a camera on a drone, you go to prison pretty much for life, you know? So you're not going to have hobbyists floating things over military sites. That's not going to happen. And the idea that there are hundreds of incursions and they don't know what they are is also absurd. They know exactly where they come from and they monitor that stuff 24/7.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Why would they tolerate a single one of them? Because I know I wouldn't.
Well, obviously, they have protocols here that would defend against anything like that.
You would think.
The story itself is flat. Just like we've been getting that, though. Do you have that same feeling from the Chinese balloon, but up about 50 knots? Because the Chinese balloon story is also ridiculous. You know, that was absurd. They're like, okay, we'll let it cross the country and take pictures and all that stuff. And this would never happen in a million years. So that was a false operation. And everything that they had to say about it was completely false, including the fact that they were going to adjust their sensors now over at NORAD so they could see these interlopers. I've put on the record before that they have direct rules against drones, but they have direct rules against balloons that go back to 1942 when Japan was launching these balloons over to our west coast, and they would land in some field and blow up in Oregon and in the Pacific Northwest. And there were incidents that killed over a dozen people like this. So they put those protocols in place then. They're already on the military books. So the idea that like, oh, we didn't know what to deal with balloons. We were prepared for missiles. No, they have a Cold War system they inherited. And that thing was on such a heavy, heavy duty trigger that all of these explanations are completely ridiculous, which is why Kirby is just lying to the public straight up at the Pentagon briefings. I mean, if I were there in the room, I would say, why are you lying your face off? Because Kirby is lying to the reporters in the room and lying to the American people. And the reporters seem to know it. They just knew that they were in a big BS spin there. I'm going to go a little further with this, and I'm going to show you how it circles around. And I want to remind everyone before we go any further that you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 181. We're going deep tonight. Dark Journalist, UFO Apotheum Nation, COG drone operation takeover. We're going to take your questions in the second half of the program. And we started the show off with the fact that we did the Alex Jones show today, and it was a fantastic show. And we reached so many people with the idea of COG and the UFO file crossover. I was delighted. And, Alex was very gracious with it. And the things, Alex really is getting, he knows what's happening with this. So he gets it, and he wants to know a way to get that message out to the public. And so we talked about it extensively, but we have more plans. I'm going to co-host 2 hours of InfoWars next week on Thursday. And that's going to be at 1 o'clock Central and 2 o'clock Eastern. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more data by then for this. But what I want to get at tonight is really that linkage of the continuity of government emergency program with this drone swarm, with the UFO threat narrative that's been pushed by the intelligence agencies. You get that combination of factors going in wide-scale knowledge around here, and you're going to change the trajectory of what's happening literally as these deeper groups try to, come after the system. And I think it's important, too, because we're in a loose period here with the weakened administration going out and with the Trump administration coming in, but not there yet. And it's this president-elect period between now and January 20th that represents a kind of maximum peril when you get into these types of situations. You don't want to see anything on this level going on, and you don't want the false, glib explanations of the FBI and the DHS on this. We're saying, hey, it looks like everybody who's up there is legally operating. Yeah, well, who are they? You know, if they're legal, then you must know who they are, right? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I want to say this also. If you're here and you're new, go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps you in touch and it keeps you up to date on the things that are happening with the show. We have some incredible documentaries for you, and we have some exciting interviews and X-Series episodes. It's all there in the newsletter, so make sure you sign up and be counted. Before I go any further, and we're taking your questions in part 2 tonight, what do you got, Miss Olivia?
Blazing River, is this a way to get COG in place before Trump takes office?
Well, this is the inevitable conclusion that there's something operational here. There's some deep faction. This is what I call the extraterritorial piece coming in. Not extraterrestrial yet, right? But there's an extraterritorial group that seems to be operating in that corridor of aerospace and the intelligence agencies. And possibly, you know, they're coordinating with the current administration to make this happen. The current administration is doing a lot, and I mean a lot, in their exit days, the lame duck days of they're just about to go packing, but they're changing all these dramatic rules in the background. They got rid of Assad, and they did that in a heartbeat, who was in Syria. You know, he'd been in there for 14 years. We weren't able to do anything to get him out. And suddenly they have the ability to snap their fingers, and he's gone. So they're making these major moves at the end. They've been trying to get us into an actual shooting war with Russia, which would have a tremendously bad impact on the world, economically and militarily. It would be a disaster. And, you know, since they're out of power, you know, I mean, they're still technically in power, even though they've been voted out. So the actions that they're doing are highly unusual. As a matter of fact, when I was reading over the list of pardons that President Biden gave out today, it was remarkable. The biggest criminals, you know, this one woman had ripped off $53 million, a petty Democratic official in Illinois. She ripped off the money and he let her go free. You know, it's absolutely absurd. And he's been handing out these different pardons to his friends on the way out. And, you know, they were going to jail or were in jail for good reason. So, true, you know, presidential pardons can be controversial, but these are some of the most absurd I've ever seen. And there's a whole Las Vegas connection with the pardons as well. But yeah, I mean, that could be a whole different show, but it's really unbelievable. Their lack of response on the drone issue, though, is particularly disturbing. So now the operation, Homeland Synchronizer, this thing has some tentacles, and it involves drone swarms and it involves UAP. They were running the drills just before we started hearing about all the stuff in New Jersey. They had floated out these things like, oh, hey, you know, an American UK base, which is out there in Suffolk, England, was getting buzzed by all these drones, and we don't know what it was. So there were European cases that were coming in like this. I mentioned the Langley one earlier, and then the COG commander doing op-eds saying, oh, America's, you know, primed to be hit, and it's undefended, and all this kind of stuff. In the background, the COG commander is running all these drills. Now, I want to get into, this is one of the drills, actually. NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM leaders visit the Western Air Defense Sector. By the way, NORAD is a lawful institution the way they instituted it to defend the airspace over the United States. But NORTHCOM, in my opinion, is an illegal outfit. So this is also a problem. It was instituted after the emergency powers of 9/11 were instituted. And we've never had the military run us since the Posse Comitatus Act came about after the Civil War, which said you can't have feds, you know, controlling things. It's all about local police in the states. So the fact that we, you know, have grown accustomed over the years to the various things brought forward in the Patriot Act and the various things that we've got as a result of it, NORTHCOM is probably one of the worst things that came out of it, because literally they said, well, Northcom, in the event of an emergency, would just seize the United States. So we have kind of the military running us under that scenario. So they're just sitting there, and they are the ones in charge, ready to be activated through the continuity of government program. Now, General Gio, as I mentioned, has 3 different functions. He is the NORAD commander, he is the Northcom commander, and he is also the COG combatant commander. So he becomes the total ruler of the United States in the event of an emergency. And they can get that emergency through many different ways. And one of the things that they did at the end of the Bush administration is change the rules for what constitutes that emergency. The original rules were set up around a nuclear incident, and they go back to Truman and Eisenhower building an incredible infrastructure while they were setting up the highway system. Beneath it, they were creating an infrastructure for surviving a nuclear exchange, which, under any circumstances, a major country, a superpower, is going to do this. So that part isn't surprising. But what happened was, as we got more and more into developing that underground military structure, which didn't have the oversight of the overworld, and more it started to break away and become this separate piece with less and less oversight. I remember hearing from different Congress people saying, when we go into those meetings trying to talk to them about it, we're not allowed to even have a pen to take notes. So less and less oversight, operating in a non-constitutional fashion, and then suddenly COG personnel start showing up in all the deep events in American history, tracking from the Kennedy assassination through Watergate, Iran-Contra, and 2001, September 11th, and the attacks there. That whole piece, along with the financial crash, the financial coup d'etat in 2008, and then the COVID op, the whole thing, we have COG personnel right in the heart of all of it, including the assassination attempt on President Trump this summer. So this past summer. Now, why is it that is related? How would these COG people happen to be related to all these major incidents? And if you check their backgrounds, they worked directly for COG just before the deep event happened that they were involved in. So it seems to represent a kind of a separate branch that's operational, and they step into the public sector, create a change in policy, and then they step back, and we're left to look at it. And occasionally you have some patsy hanging out there like a Thomas Crooks or an Oswald or, whoever it would happen to be, Oliver North. And this other structure just keeps moving on with its piece. So getting to the root of that structure, getting oversight back over the continuity of government program and a keen eye on those emergency powers rules would be a huge step forward that would come out of this. But the thing is, they know that also. And so they know that they're raising the stakes by this incredible drone swarm and raising the idea of emergency powers. So we're in a strange time wave here. And so they could take the test, take the data, and then retreat, or they could take the test, take the data, and say, we don't want to have to deal with this incoming administration. We're going to go for this now. That is the question about what is happening in the background. That's the next piece that we're going to get to with this. But I do feel that it's significant that Gio was doing these drills in November just before we got this. Now, some of the first sightings are in Monmouth County and New Jersey, and the kind of waves are coming out of that area. Now, Monmouth has a very interesting trajectory there in the background, where it was a major center for exotic technology in those bases going back to the Cold War, 1950s and 60s. And it was rumored to redevelop, to be a major redevelopment center for UFO technology, interestingly enough. One of the things that I found out when I was looking at Monmouth is that Netflix bought 300 acres there in 2022, and that's their compound. They're there. They're creating one of the largest sound studio production stages ever, anywhere. So the write-up on it is in October 2022, Netflix signed an agreement to build a major state-of-the-art production complex, Netflix Studio Fort Monmouth. Now, it's right on the grounds where the fort used to be. And this is where all the sightings are taking place now. The Netflix contract was facilitated by the Fort Monmouth Economic Revitalization Authority. And they went on, and Governor Phil Murphy facilitated the whole thing. And of course, he's right in the heart of this. I just found it interesting that we have Netflix sitting right in the heart of that. Now, Netflix has taken it upon themselves to roll out a number of UFO disinformation pieces. One of the things that they are working on in the background right now is an Obama-funded, and that's literally President Obama, there's no doubt about it, movie about Betty and Barney Hill, who the original abductees in New Hampshire, of course, the famous case and probably the most honest abductees to ever come down the pike. They were abducted. They had this experience. But what has Obama got to do with funding this and getting in the heart of the middle of it? And now we have Netflix Studio right where all of these drone sightings are happening. That, to me, was a strange crossover. Of course, this was the being that Betty Hill claimed to have seen during that abduction experience, and it set the tone for so much of the UFO abduction experience happening all the way back in 1961. Now, let's look at this here. This is a map of the drone sightings in Monmouth County, and it's a heat map, so you can see, like, basically, this is the center of where those drone happenings are taking place. Those sightings are all over Monmouth, and that's right where that Netflix compound is. I found that interesting on a few levels. Now, in the middle of all this, as I mentioned, we've seen legitimate, regular UFO sightings. This is people who are looking at something that is not a drone and absolutely looks like a UFO in the traditional sense of, saucer shape, something of this nature. So now, in the last 2 days, there have been major sightings over California and Oregon. And the California one, I think, was interesting. That was the most recent one. The Oregon one, it was these professional pilots report mysterious lights moving at extreme speeds across Oregon skies. At least 4 commercial pilots encountered mysterious lights over the weekend. And the researchers theorized they could be flares from numerous Starlink satellites. I want to mention this about Elon Musk here, since Starlink came up in relation to this sighting. Musk had plenty of time to respond to all of these happenings. And he hasn't said anything substantive in relation to the drone thing. But he has Starlink, so he can see the whole thing. He knows exactly what's going on. But his silence is deafening. There's no question about it. As I mentioned at the top of the program, President Trump came out and said, you know what? The government's looking at this and they don't know who's operating those drones. I don't believe it. If you don't want to tell the public, shoot them down. And he's right. Because it's either we know what they are or you shoot them down. But Elon hasn't been involved in this, even though he has the most access. So it shows a lot of limits to the things that Elon Musk can do. I think that he is just part of this system. And he floated a meme out there because there was a senator who came forward and said, actually, I have intel. Someone gave him this intel, probably the Central Intelligence Agency. He didn't say, but it was some intelligence agency who said that it was, in fact, an Iranian mothership that was feeding these things in. Now, it's interesting because even the term mothership shows the Central Intelligence Agency is in the heart of this scare around the whole thing, around the drones and the drone swarms, because that comes out of, the whole mothership piece. We've got the whole Close Encounters of the Third Kind. These were the things that were happening, but mothership actually comes out of early World War II pieces, which they applied. The Central Intelligence Agency applied the term to UFO sightings. So they had this idea of a major ship giving off these smaller ships. Well, when you see terms like, UFO mothership in the news and places like Monmouth, which are all heavily associated with that background of the UFO file, then we're in deep water when it comes to all this. I want to mention something else here, which is there is a a comparison in history, which comes down to us, which was the original airship sightings from 1897. And I see a lot of reenactments of things playing out with these drone surges, including the War of the Worlds 1938 Orson Welles broadcast, which, by the way, was also only about a half hour out of New Jersey. There, it was in New Jersey, and it was only a half hour out of the main epicenter of where these sightings are taking place. So I think I'm seeing all these nods that don't seem to be just coincidental. Monmouth, you've got that major piece, and then you have the whole thing with the War of the Worlds announcement, which caused a panic in 1938 before people even knew about anything related to UFOs. They had science fiction ideas here and there. But I wanted to show this map because in the newspapers in 1897, there was a swarm of airships before we even had flight. So, some dirigibles and things like that had been flown, but we didn't have the Wright brothers. We didn't have planes up there. There was a massive wave of airship sightings, and anyone who's been around the UFO stuff knows about it and can trace it back. But it was interesting looking at a map around Dallas, Fort Worth, and all these different places, because it just reminded me when I was looking at that, I was like, this reminds me of the what we're seeing in Monmouth. So it was one of those things that just stuck with me as I was doing it. Now, U.S. Senator says mysterious drones spotted in New Jersey region should be shot down if necessary. The drones appear to avoid detection by traditional methods such as helicopter and radio, according to a state lawmaker. Now, the shot down thing is very interesting because, in fact, it is logical to shoot them down. Because if they're operating without identifying themselves, they're a threat in the skies, whether they carry out the threat or not. U.S. Senator has called for mysterious drones spotted flying over sensitive areas in New Jersey and other parts of the mid-Atlantic to be shot down if necessary, even as it remains unclear who owns them. Quote, "We should be doing some very urgent intelligence analysis to take them out of the skies, especially if they're flying over airports or military bases," Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut said Thursday as concerns about the drones spread across Capitol Hill. People in the New York region are also concerned that the drones may be sharing airspace with commercial airlines, he said. It's absolutely logical. So there's Democrats and Republicans across the board. They see what's going on. The only thing that seems to be checked out is the military, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Biden administration. They are not fessing up to this at all. And it's getting to a breaking point where I think we're seeing, in this short, basically a month or so before Trump gets inaugurated, this is a real constitutional crisis on our hands, because if they're not responding, they are not providing for the common defense. And that is absolutely enshrined in the Constitution. Now, I will say this, that Kirby, who I've gone through and really, shown you the extent of his lies in this episode, the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said there were no reported sightings in any restricted airspace. Totally untrue. You have people from military bases saying these things are flying in. You have people on naval carriers saying these things are flying over us. So he's just standing up there lying. And his credibility is completely deflated. That's also dangerous. A little more on that. He says, "We have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security threat or a public safety threat," Kirby said. Now, in 1952, if you go back, there was a huge wave of sightings directly over the White House. And this was a fascinating period in time because there was no explanation for it, and the government couldn't defend against it. So they were sitting there with this huge wave on their hands. Now, what's fascinating to me is the same line that they gave out was, "We don't see that they pose any threat to national security, so whatever they are, don't worry about it," basically. And that's the same exact track. So you have one group over here, rattling sabers on the CIA UFO threat narrative side, going to Congress and saying, "We're under threat. We need a UFO defense office." And then you have this guy, we're in the middle of a drone swarm that, thousands of citizens on the ground have seen. We have films, we have high-level senators, congresspeople, governors, and this guy has the audacity to stand up there and say nothing's happening. So there's an incredible disconnect going on in the middle of all this. to me, that makes it a very, very dangerous situation indeed. And we're going to get into why and how this could all work out one way or another. Is definitely a fork in the road, but a lot is going to change as a result of this. I can guarantee you that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is UFO Apotheum Nation, the COG drone operation takeover. We're going to be taking your questions here shortly. And I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter that keeps us in touch and lets you know about the incredible episodes that we have coming up for you. Interviews, documentaries like the one we just put out on JFK, the final speech with the Antarctica UFO file and Lloyd Berkner. Absolutely stunning. That's free for you there on the channel. And also we have incredible interviews coming up for you as well. And that's all there free in the newsletter for you. So just take advantage of that, stand up and be counted, and make sure that you're on that newsletter list. And you can feel free to subscribe for more content and some incredible things that we're going to be doing for our members as well. That's all there at darkjournalist.com. Now, I mentioned that Miss Olivia is going to be taking, putting your questions together. We'll be taking here shortly. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
This is intriguing. Alyssa Marie says it's chemical warfare from the Middle East, and Nixie 1986 says some of the drones are spraying substances, though. The new pandemic? This could be an interesting idea that an excuse, they don't want to shoot them down because shooting them down would release germ warfare, chemical warfare, at least as a cover story of why they're not, and also if they do eventually, is that the agenda?
Yeah, it's a good point. If they felt they were in a toxic environment, though, you would see fighter jets all over these things. So whatever it is, and I'm going to read something that came up. Actually, Alex posted this. It came off of Reddit, but a couple of people seem to know the source and that the source was reliable. Although I can't vouch for this, but I think it's interesting. And we'll play this out here. So 25. The name of the post is Radar Guy here. I know who is operating the drones. 25-year radar operator for a major agency here. Just thought I'd let you all know what has been going on these past few weeks. The drones are part of a military drill being conducted by Space Force. Everything is on a need-to-know basis, which is why there's so much confusion. What gets me concerned and why I had to make this post is that something big is about to go down. I happen to know that there are additional full lockout drills that are scheduled to take place between now and Christmas Eve. These operations involve the full turnover of all radar and radio and aircraft communications to the military for several hours at a time. In conjunction with that, there are also scheduled satellite launches off the books. Some kind of big show is what they're setting up for the public very soon. CNN was even at our facility shooting pre-roll footage. I don't know what exactly is going on, but I know all of this. And then at the end of it, he says, get ready. Now, a few people, like I said, Alex and someone else who was reputable, reposted this and seemed to think that the source was absolutely reliable. Based on that, they could never have run an op without the government knowing. So the government leaving the public out like this would be an incredible travesty, sort of the final denouement of this administration. But in terms of what they would be doing and why Space Force would be running this, remember Space Force was originally set up by Trump to pull that UFO file back under executive control after it had been lost. And I've gone into some detail about what an innovation Space Force is in that sense, which is, Space Force is something that a number of different agencies before Trump tried to make happen. Bush tried to make it happen in 1992. Bush the second tried to make it happen. And there are all these plans, I remember Bush and Quayle, if you go back and you look at their 1992 platform, it says a mission to Mars. and a new Space Force and all these things. Well, that Space Force was the first thing that was created as a military arm since, right after World War II in the Air Force. So something major was going on there with it. The fact that Space Force would take it upon themselves to launch these drones everywhere and leave the public out of the loop because they're preparing some big show, and they're also going to take over radio communications and things like that. I can't vouch for it. I can't speak to it, but I'm very interested in these types of rumors and what they're related to. I can tell you this, that somebody is running an operation, and the group that I'm pointing to in terms of the group the most capable and who seems to be in charge is Northcom. And Northcom is it's the same commander as the COG piece. So that's where my own analysis takes me. But we'll see how these types of stories play out, especially, we have to be open to what happens with this. But to get to the bottom of it, the public needs to demand to know from this administration who it is that is operating there in our skies. It's very simple. Yes.
David Allen says, if the UFOs are drills, they could be testing and priming artificial intelligence systems at Space Force, Satellogic, SpaceX, and Palantir.
Yeah. Well, remember I reported that the whole thing about Homeland Synchronizer, that is an operation. And again, it's a test, it's a drill. And then could the drill go live? This is what, on a number of different deep events like 9/11, for example, that's what took place, which is there's a drill involved and then the drill goes live. And when the drill goes live, in this case, you have all of this, there's an out of control condition in the sky. There are all these craft, there's drone swarms. Hey, look, there's UAPs over here. And we have to boot ourselves into this emergency power situation. That's the thing to watch out for, because what's taken place is they lost a crucial election. This group inside wasn't just the Democrats, but that group that wanted to keep us on this course of limiting free speech, which is a global group. And, there were a number of things that were going on in relation to it. They are the ones who lost in that election. So, this could very well be the thing that they had up their sleeve to it, but they could also be collecting the data of how people are responding here and how informed that response is to see and ask themselves, can we really pull this off? So it's very important, I think, for the public to demand those answers from the Biden administration. The Biden administration, which is being the major block in all of this, their FBI, their DHS, they are the ones who are not fessing up with the truth. Yes, what do you got?
Mr. Wolf says, one of the main objectives on a very basic level is to simply get people acclimated to looking up. And Sick of the BS says, information vacuum creates fear.
Oh, that's really true, yeah. I'm going to read the joint DHS-FBI statement on reports of drones in New Jersey. And, prepare to be incredibly entertained, because this is absolutely absurd, but I'll read it anyway. This is the official statement. Quote, we have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security threat or public safety threat or have a foreign nexus. The FBI, DHS, and our federal partners, in close coordination with the New Jersey State Police, continue to deploy personnel and technology to investigate this situation and confirm whether the reported drone flights are actually drones or are instead manned aircraft or otherwise inaccurate sightings. Historically, we've experienced cases of mistaken identity where reported drones are in fact manned aircraft or facilities. We are supporting local law enforcement in New Jersey with numerous detection methods, but have not corroborated any of the reported visual sightings with electronic detection. And they go on to say, we take every threat seriously, but we don't see one here. And so that is, along with Kirby going out there. And it's interesting because they're claiming that the drone incursions are entirely lawful, which is completely ridiculous. And the lack of identity represents a huge danger, as I've mentioned.
Anybody who lived through 9/11 can see through. That is so offensive.
Yes.
I can't wrap my head around it at all.
It's incredible, and we have had situations and reports of drones crashing in the backyards of these different households. And then we also had a situation where all of these vehicles that were, set for rescue operations for something else, totally unrelated to drones or anything. There was one plane crash in relation to this, but they were going, and they had to stop ambulances and things because these things had reached into a certain place where law enforcement was like, okay, we don't want you going down this particular street or whatever. So they are already changing the rhythm of life in these different cities, which is entirely absurd. The number of sightings has increased in recent days, though officials say many of the objects seen may have been planes rather than drones. It's also possible that a single drone has been reported more than once. So, hey, it's all in your imagination. So here you have the divide of the official story, giving you a totally false gaslighting story, and then what's really going on the ground. Why you would pull that off at the end of an administration that is totally weakened and also include around it elements of this kind of, like terror from the skies subset idea. Because, of course, these drones haven't done anything yet, but their mere presence represents a threat. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. I want to read here a little definition around the continuity of government so we can understand what we're walking into. And then we'll pull it around with some more things about the drones and where they've been sighted. And then we'll take your questions. We'll do it that way. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X series 181, UFO Apotheum Nation, COG drone operation takeover. Here we go. What do you got?
David Termina. TJ, the link you posted on Homeland SYNCHRONIZER featured pop-up ads for Epirus, or Epirus, an anti-drone directed energy tech company. Their videos look like mini Melchizedek UFO killer death beams.
We just did an episode which is called Brother Sunburst, the UFO Melchizedek device, which is nicknamed the UFO killer. And it's a device, not a person. And it's very interesting because this hunt for the device, as it were, seems to have populated history with some major stories around the UFO file. And if you watch it correctly, you can see everything for this search going back to John Trump getting tasked with finding the UFO killer in Nikola Tesla's papers, which is what they sent him in there for, find the Melchizedek device. Or as they put it, find the device that takes down flying objects at a distance. They didn't say go find the death ray. They said find the UFO killer. Brother Sunburst, George Van Tassel, and George Adamski, the FBI taps George Adamski looking for where is he getting all this UFO information. They hear him talking about the Melchizedek device. What I put forward is that because of the close association of Sunburst and the fact that Sunburst gets all this money and gets this huge organic farm right next to President Reagan, I believe that they took the device and stashed it there because there were scientists who were working on it that the FBI wanted George Adamski, this major kind of UFO contactee of the 50s, to give up to authorities. And either he didn't do it or he gave them a phony person. In the 70s, you can find Curtis LeMay, retired Joint Chiefs, Major Hawk, to the right of Attila the Hun. He was looking for the device. So by the time you get to Mar-a-Lago and the raid at Mar-a-Lago and how unusual it is and how they were supposedly looking for classified information, but that case went away, then you know that we're into interesting territory across the whole spectrum. And that is the story of the Brother Sunburst Melchizedek device. I believe that I'm going to have absolute proof of where the device was and witnesses for who saw it. But I think the fact that President Reagan developed SDI Star Wars so shortly after Sunburst was his neighbor there in 1976, on one hand, and then it's 1983 when they make Star Wars. I think there's a cross current there. Yes, what do you got?
David Tremita again. Also interesting that one of the major backers of Papyrus is Michael Ovitz, former Hollywood super agent who happens to be married to Chris Mellon's UFO-obsessed deceased brother's ex-wife.
Oh, wow. Wow, isn't that interesting? They've tried to drag out Chris Mellon for this, and he's tried to, cash in along with Elizondo, saying that, this proves that what we were saying, we have this kind of UFO defense. We need the UFO defense. It's very interesting, and I do think that what's taken place is that this is a clear demarcation between, that whole UFO field, which bowed down to the likes of Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo and their UFO threat narrative. And this, which is the test run of a UFO threat narrative that would trigger emergency powers. That narrative cannot be allowed to build up and create a UFO defense office. And this whole thing cannot be allowed to attach itself to government, coming directly out of counterintelligence agents through the Central Intelligence Agency, through DIA, through NGA, and NRO. That thing that is being created to seize emergency powers for a UFO threat has to be exposed, and it has to be litigated against, and it has to be legislatively dealt with, and the people involved in it can't be co-opting this person and that person and just everybody's going along because Chris Mellon is a billionaire and because he's been running Lion Lou Elizondo for the past 7 years. All those people in the UFO field with this incident, that whole thing, if you look at it really carefully, we're in a totally different ballgame. And, having people like Corbell and all those other jokers around the UFO field promoting a UFO threat with all this and saying, hey, I've got this leaked thing, it's a jellyfish UFO and all that stuff. If it was just entertainment or whatever, that's fine. When they moved it into that congressional venue and had the counter intel people replacing the genuine black ops whistleblowers, that's a very dangerous situation for the United States of America. And the Central Intelligence Agency is, again, it's not a legal organization, actually, and neither is Northcom. So there's a problem there if Northcom and the CIA control this whole thing and neither of them are technically legal. So, there's a lot of problems there. These are extra constitutional, Northcom and the CIA. They're not they're not foreseen in the Constitution. So, we're dealing with groups that have more alliances with international finance than with the United States of America. The question is, can the incoming administration separate themselves enough from that system to prosecute it? That's going to be a very important situation. But in the meantime, this whole congressional dance with counter-intel people giving false UFO threat narratives after this should be a completely out of bounds. It should be a disgrace if anyone tries to lay that out there, because this is a test of a UFO threat narrative from above. And they're using drones in this case, but they could just as easily use UAPs, which they don't want to lay on the public yet. Okay. I'm going to read this quote now. What else you got?
Unapologetic Christian says, Star Wars is key. The relay is essential. SpaceX and Starlink will be what's deployed. Spiritual warfare is frequency warfare. Think, how would you block their cyberspace? Jam it or create a net?
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting thoughts expressed there as well. There are frequency aspects to this. There's the whole Havana syndrome piece that we brought up. There's the Apotheum aspect. And one of the things that caught me immediately when I was seeing the drone cases is that there was an Apotheum aspect involved. So a couple came forward and gave an interview to a local New Jersey television station and said, while I was viewing these drones, I lost time and electrical appliances stopped working. That's not a drone, ordinary technology taking place there. Something else. There's some pinch of this aspect going on. It has to do directly with Apotheum effects. Now, when you go into standard UFO cases, what happens is somebody gets abducted. And what I learned from studying the work of Professor John Mack, and I met him when I was very young. I actually was 19 years old. And one of the things that he mentioned very early on there, he was the Harvard professor who took the UFO file seriously, and he went through all of these various things with it. But one of the things that he was doing was he was keeping an eye on what took place when people were being abducted. And one of the things that happened with them was that not only were they abducted into spaceships and grabbed and brought in, but the cases that he was seeing, they were taken through things. So they were taken through walls, and they would dematerialize through things and then would be put back by dematerialization as well. So we were in an unusual, completely unusual situation with that. Those types of effects I started to catalog, and after a while, there was such a body of work there that I decided that this is actually a different physics that steps in when the UFOs show up. So that's the Apotheum physics. It's a reality distortion physics, and the cases are undeniable, including the fact that there seems to be kind of a green mist that shows up in relation to these sightings as well. They seem to bring lightning as well. And as I've mentioned, when they land in certain areas, nothing else can ever grow there again. So, all of that, there's so many different things I could describe to you, but when you get into Havana syndrome and all the frequency attacks and the microwave attacks and the different types of advanced weapons that they have in relation to this, and that includes all the things that they've discovered by smashing particles together, with all the particle colliders and the various beam weapons and things. So there's a lot to be brought to bear. But when I say the term Apotheum, it captures exactly what people have described when they've gone through these various things. The missing time is the big key, and Apotheum did show up in the drone sightings. So to me, it says that whoever is employing the actual drones was somehow using a technology that was connected directly to the UFO technology. There's no question about it. Yeah. Give me one more.
Amarillo gun runners. Wouldn't Trump have clearance for a U.S. operation or drill by Space Force?
Yeah, absolutely. He gets classified briefings, and the fact that they're not telling him, obviously what he did today was a shot across the bow, and what's very interesting is when you have presidents who are coming in, they don't usually say much. They're doing things in the background, they're setting things up. Trump, on the other hand, has been very vocal as he sees that this administration on the way out is doing all these things, including the pardons that they did. But I think the fact that he sees them moving us closer to World War III and the Ukraine Russia battle, and also the fact that he's now seeing them being irresponsible with the drone aspect, he's saying, I don't believe it. Now, he's the president-elect. He doesn't believe that they don't know what the drones are. So he's saying, if you don't want to tell the public what they are, then shoot them down. It's one or the other. This is raising the state. I can't tell you what a statement that is, but it tells us that we're in a totally different league with all of this. And, I mentioned Musk earlier and some of the things that he didn't say. He didn't say anything about this. He put out a few memes here and there. And one of them was about, the Iran thing and how, don't use this as an excuse to go to war with Iran or something like that. And then he put out some other sarcastic, snarky thing, So we do have to remember, as much as people like to pin a lot of hopes on people like Musk and all the rest, and some good things have happened there with X, this guy is on a very short leash when it comes to the UFO file. Let's get real. That's the reason he can't talk about it. He's got all the satellites. He knows exactly what the drone thing is all about as well. So he knows that. And the question is, when he's interacting with Trump and all that, he's obviously not giving those details out. Now, I'm going to read this little section here about Professor Scott talking about the continuity of government and their role in American history. And then I have one more thing about the position of the drones, and then we'll take your questions.
Okay. There's plenty of questions.
Excellent. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show deep, deep, deep tonight with Dark Journalist UFO Apotheum Nation X-Series 181 COG Drone Operation Takeover. Okay. Okay, the easiest way to show the action of emergency powers and that COG was implemented, in 2001, it's easiest to show in the case of 9/11. So it is conceded in the historical record now that the continuity of government plans of the Doomsday Project were implemented by Dick Cheney, who was the vice president, on 9/11, apparently before the last of the 4 hijacked planes had crashed. One of the reasons 9/11 keeps coming up tonight, by the way, in case you're interested, is COG got such a tremendous boost. And we did get aspects of COG like the TSA, like Homeland Security, like Northcom as a result of 9/11. So it's intimately related, the type of power grab that was involved there, to what we're seeing now and what could develop out of this. And if enough attention is brought to it, how it may force them to back off on it as well. All right, the 9/11 Commission could not locate records of key decisions taken by Cheney on that day, suggesting they have taken place on the secure phone in the tunnel leading to the presidential bunker. With such a high classification that the 9/11 Commission was never supplied the phone records, my guess is that this was the COG network phone, which is called the Doomsday Communications Network. Now, that was meant to be used in the event of a nuclear situation. It can't be tracked. There are no calls that can be tracked or recorded in it, and its communication doesn't show up anywhere. It is a secret network, and they've used it in all of these various deep events. But that Doomsday Network comes into play over and over again in a situation like this, where they need to coordinate things outside of the normal channels of oversight of government. So you have the regular kind of propped up government that comes in there and says, oh, we're going to do oversight here and there. And then you have the actual genuine deep players. And in this case, around the UFO file, the Ex-Protect group. Those are the ones who are putting us into this kind of perilous situation. Their thing, the Ex-Protect group, is what they want to do is make sure that nobody gets near the actual secret aspect of the UFO file. That's what they've been designed to do. So over the years, they've ruined reputations. They've put out disinformation stories. They've created phony corporations. They've run, disinformation TV shows, whatever it happens to be. And in some cases, they've gone after and taken down various people who had penetrated into their plans, people like James McDonald and things like that over the years. And I think it could maybe even add Mac Tawney's to that as well. And Morris Jessup, of course, classically was one of the earliest examples where they just eliminated this guy who got too close to their operations. But I think it is important for us to remember that now that the UFO file is moving into this stage, that 9/11 provides the template for when COG was activated. So that's the key here. A little more on this. It's almost certain that the secure phone in the White House tunnel belonged to the Secret Service, therefore was part of the secure network of the White House Communications Agency. If so, it represents a striking link between 9/11 and the JFK assassination. Now, the WHCA, White House Communications Agency, boasts on its website that the agency was a key player in documenting the assassination of President Kennedy. However, it's not clear for whom the documentation was conducted, for the WHC logs and transcripts were in fact withheld inexcusably from the first Warren Commission and later the House Select Committee on Assassination and subsequent investigations. No one ever got to see those because they're part of COG communications. You can't get your hands on them. The Secret Service had installed a WHCA portable radio in the lead car of the presidential motorcade. This, in turn, was in contact by police radio with the pilot car ahead of it, carrying the Dallas Police Department Deputy Chief Lumpkin of the 488th Army Intelligence Reserve Unit. Records of the WHCA communication from the motorcade never reached the House Select Committee on Assassinations or the Assassination Record Review Board. Thus, we cannot tell if they would explain some of the anomalies on the 2 channels of the Dallas Police Department. Now, what that goes around to say is that the COG group, when they get activated, they can operate this network, which can't be tracked. So their activities can never be tracked back to the actual perpetrators. This is the problem And with you have an incoming administration, people like Bobby Kennedy there, like Tulsi Gabbard, and like President Trump, and Patel and all that, they have got to, it has to be fundamental in the things that they do to make sure that the COG Doomsday Network piece has oversight directly from the executive branch. This is what's been missing, and this is exactly why they've been able to move in and out of these various deep events in history. And the Kennedy assassination is where the first deep state revolt against the White House takes place. They used COG directly. They're using the actual Doomsday Communication Network during the trip to communicate back and forth and say, hypothetically, was it effective? Were they able to pull off the assassination? Good. Now we can move on to the hospital. So when you get into other cases like Watergate, John Dean, of course, with the Council for the Continuity of Government, he becomes the person who's the linchpin to take down Nixon. There are other cases of it, like Iran-Contra. They use the same network as well. And then by the time you get to 2001, you get, the COG bunker being opened up, Dick Cheney going in and coming out a month later with the Patriot Act, like Moses with the Ten Commandments. And, so this whole system plays out, but over and over again, COG is playing a central role. And now their ultimate combination of plans is this secret infrastructure, and that's been working on secret technology, we call X technology, on this program. And they've been working on that, and they now are at a disconnected level from what we have here in the public. So on such a level, and they've broken away to such an extent that the idea that they could pull off some kind of martial law scenario using UFO threat becomes, I think, much more plausible in light of the current events. Even though what we're looking at are drones, we can see that there are, just kind of replace the idea of these weird, mysterious drones with UAP, and you're right in the middle of that scenario. That's the thing that we need to bring to bear, and that's the thing that Congress needs to investigate. That's the thing that the incoming administration needs to bring forward and to correct the oversight on that. And in my opinion, since the entire structure of COG is technically not legal, to abolish it and replace it with something else. This is the crucial aspect, and there should never be one individual holding the leadership keys for NORTHCOM, NORAD, and as the COG combatant commander. I don't know how that ever happened in the first place, but it is the triple play, in my opinion, of a fascist totalitarian takeover. That's the piece that we're seeing in the middle of all this. And with that, Miss Olivia, I have more to get to on the UFO sightings. We'll weave it into the questions as we go.
Okay. The Mac says, is this a test by the deep state problem reaction solution? And Safe and Effective says, DJ, they're testing what remains of their current mass media propaganda capabilities. They want to see how effective it is and who still believes their methods of control.
There's no question about it. And what I think and what I'm seeing a lot of is that there seems to be a test reaction piece here that is in the middle. It's incubating something. So it's in the middle of creating a situation. It's evolving while we're paying attention to it. So this situation started off with a few drones here and drone stories by COG commanders saying, hey, Langley got attacked by these UAP. We don't know what they are. And they were swarms over the base for days, But now it's evolving, and the evolving part is that the government is denying that there are even drones. So we're getting into a very strange place with the incoming president calling it out, senators calling it out, governors calling it out, and the administration playing a poker face. That's a dangerous split, in my opinion. And the only thing that can account for it is something massive. So it's not an ordinary test run and they go back and collect the information. Something massive is going on. There's been a massive shift. And it's like you can compare it to Event 201, which was set up as the sort of dry run for what would happen in the event of the COVID takeover. And they ran that in the September in the fall before they ran COVID. And, you know, they had Avril Haines and Bill Gates and all those people were all involved in it. This is what this feels like, which is it's the setup for the thing that they want to do. And so I would agree with all of that speculation. In fact, yes.
Joe Halverson, can DJ clarify his views on the UFO issue for newbies? Does he believe in NHI, or does he think all UFOs are government psyops?
Well, I'm going to tell you about the term NHI. Speaking of government psyop, did you know the term NHI was created by Chris Mellon? And David Grush told me that himself. And he said, oh, we just created it because we wanted to come up with a new name for what this could be. So NHI itself as a term is absurd. But in terms of if it's off-world visitors that are operating genuine UFOs, not these drones, but genuine UFOs and UFO cases, there's a possibility that it's off-world visitors that are visiting here and have advanced technology. There's a possibility that there's a group here, and I've gotten into that in my Cosmos Club episodes, something like the Tall Whites, who built a technology and lived side by side with humanity. Or in the case of Mac Tanis, he had this whole idea about the crypto-terrestrials who were a little more advanced than humanity, and they lived side by side with them, but they didn't want to kind of give away their presence in the middle of all this stuff. And they were a small, very elite group. I think somewhere in here. Yeah, this story, I think there is an intrigue about the story of the Tall Whites in the middle of this, because the Tall Whites were seen by Charles Hall and when he worked at Nellis Air Force Base, and he saw generals interacting with them. And their story, is generally like an alien story that they came from somewhere else and were here and were exchanging technology with the government. Okay, it's a far out story, but this is the nature of Area 51. But what's interesting, if you consider some of my research around the Cosmos Club and the fact that the guy who set it up there, John Wesley Powell, got tremendous backing and came out of nowhere after he spent all this time stationed there in Missouri at Cape Girardeau, which in 1941 would be the site of the first major UFO crash before Roswell, when it had witnesses, bodies, and all the rest of it. But this guy's operating there during like the Civil War. The Cosmos Club is very old. And he goes and spends all this time with this tribe, the Paiutes in Nevada. And there's a whole mystical element involved with how he sets up the Cosmos Club, gets tremendous backing. This guy was a nobody. And then suddenly he is the toast of Washington with millions of dollars to go pursue the Grand Canyon and all the rest of it. It seemed to me a very deep possibility that through his Native American contacts, he found some sort of ancient technology, and that groups that you hear about, the kind of street legend about things like the Tall Whites and others, are related to this, that there is a leftover of an advanced culture that was here that is completely terrestrial. And that aspect, and that it's kind of a good cover for them to be coming from somewhere else if they're actually native here. But I never ruled out the extraterrestrial possibility. As a matter of fact, in many cases, as you know, it's the first most accepted. But then there's the whole idea about these kind of eighth sphere entities, and this comes from the work of Rudolf Steiner. And in looking at that, just to summarize it real quickly, there could be groups that are advanced, but that are outside of the kind of human life wave, and that they want to enter it, but that their physicality is different. And that the whole idea of the eighth sphere as a mystical concept is that the groups that operate there are under this kind of harmonic technological aspect. And the harmonic technological aspect is trying to creep into and dominate humanity's spiritual evolution. So it goes deep. We've done a number of shows about the eighth sphere and Steiner's concept of harmonic technology invading the human space, which clearly he foresaw it like he was reading tomorrow's headlines today in 1920. when he was looking ahead to the 21st century about the type of clash that we were going to be involved in as a society with the emerging technology versus a kind of drowsy humanity. But the idea of the eighth sphere literally is drawing people in through virtual reality into a thought realm where they're no longer completely on their trajectory and their normal course, and they're projected, sort of their life essence is projected into this eighth sphere. That piece, I think, is substantial and can explain a great deal when you're talking about the UFO file. And if the tall white story, is absolutely real, and it very well could be, especially with the sightings of them in Las Vegas, they may very well have been a culture here that was advanced, and through the Cosmos Club rediscovery of them, they came to, some type of agreement with groups here, because that whole aerospace story, as we said, it's very open in the 19th century. We have examples of advanced craft flying during that period, like the airship mystery. So there's a lot there to open up and pursue, and we're going to bring more forward on the whole eighth sphere aspect as well. Yeah, what do you got?
Tony Kistner, does DJ believe Carol Rosin's story about von Braun and the last card being the ET card as a reason to weaponize space?
Yeah, absolutely. I brought it up today. It's funny you mentioned that. Look, everything that he said and that he predicted there has come true. That they would use terrorists, that first they would use the Russians, and they would use terrorists, and then they would use meteorites, and then the final card was they were going to use the alien invasion card. It's interesting to me because von Braun is a complex character, and of course he was the father of our NASA rocket program, but he's also an SS rocket scientist. So that clash in his personality, I think, has to be brought in. What Russell Targ told me about him was that his mother was psychic, and she was such a well-known psychic that officials and other people would come to her to inquire about various things. And so I think there's a psychic aspect when he's injecting the whole Elon thing into his Project Mars book, when he mentions that the ruler of Mars, he calls him the Elon, and he has the same exact spelling. And here we have the world's richest man who's, in charge of SpaceX, and his whole thing is about going to Mars. I mean, it's quite remarkable if you think about it. It's not an intangible thing to prove. It's in his book. So you'll find other interesting things in that book if you read it, because remember, it's Project Mars and the Mars Project. There's two different books there. And but there is something interesting about that book, because one of the things that he says in there is he talks about Colonel Halt. And Colonel Halt turns out to be the name of somebody involved in the Bentwaters case, which is one of the most famous UFO cases from 1980 in England, with these expatriate American soldiers involved, along with the idea that Ron Hubbard is one of the commanders in that book. I mean, there's a lot of predictive pieces in von Braun's study. And of course, whenever you get around aerospace, there are some strange pieces of predictive. It's almost like they're looking ahead directly into that future. And we've done the time travel episodes around Thomas Townsend Brown, who related to his daughter and her boyfriend at the time that time travel was possible and was something that they were working on. This is a lot deeper than the kind of, looking glass, which is one of the junk conspiracy things that was just thrown out there. But the fundamental idea that they could look into the future to see things is the same reason why you get the Del Show painting of Trump. It's something that we showed in our last documentary. It's astounding that this guy could be painting this thing in 1890, and it is an arrow, and right in the middle of it is Trump, and it says 45 for the series on the bottom, and Trump is the 45th president. I never get tired of bringing that one up because I think it represents, again, this crossover. Whenever you're dealing with the air, you're dealing with mystical elements, which is why our major aviation pioneer, Charles Lindbergh, when he's crossing the Atlantic for the first time and breaking all these records and changing the dynamic of flight, what does he hear? He hears all these people, voices, disembodied voices talking inside the plane. And, he's not saying that for a laugh. He's very serious about it in his autobiography. So, there's the spirits of the air aspect that comes into this. There's something about that flight thing. I mean, think about religions. They're all pointing, God coming out of the sky and all the rest of it. There's something very deep when we get into that level, which goes beyond just looking at it as a physical realm. There's an aspect of spiritually, even the idea of the fall, you're falling out of the sky, right, down to earth, out of heaven, down to earth. So that's why we get into very deep territory whenever we're around space or the skies. And that has to be brought in. It has to be understood. If you don't bring in the deeper psychic aspect when you're dealing with the UFO file, if you're just looking for a nuts and bolts approach, it'll never work. We've seen people research it that way for decades and nothing ever happened, right? Except the fact that they know, hey, this thing can outperform anything that humanity has. Yes, what do you got?
David Termine again. DJ, if Keely's machines didn't work unless Keely was operating it, perhaps the secret group found a way to implement their own dark consciousness into a technology, and the result being Apotheum?
Yeah. John Worrell Keely, this is important. We've done shows on Keely, and he's part of this aspect. But the fact that Steiner, who headed up the Public Mystery School of Anthroposophy, and Blavatsky, heading up the Public Mystery School of Theosophy, both have extraordinary things to say about him. And in Blavatsky's case, she devotes an entire chapter in her Secret Doctrine to John Worrell Keely and his technological advances. I will say this, that the woman who was funding him was also funding Tesla. So the back and forth there. And then she goes and moves to England to be a member of the Theosophical Society. I think there's something to be said about Keely, which is he had to be there, it's true, for the demonstrations, but he demonstrated discs, like flying discs, as far back as 1880. I have depictions of it and the witness stories of it. The story is that he demonstrated for the U.S. Army a craft that could go 500 miles an hour in the 1880s. So that psychic technology, which came out later, after Keely dies, and then all of his information and all of his secrets get shipped off to the Theosophical Society to be buried in the UK until a more appropriate time for humanity. There's a very interesting key if you want to follow up on the Apotheum link with that, which is the Strader device that comes up in the mystery plays by Rudolf Steiner. There's no question about it, because in the actual play, you have the person with the Strader device, which is clearly the Keely psychic technology, and you have Ahriman kind of playing a tempter, trying to get him to use it. And I think that's a whole interesting thing. As a matter of fact, I'll let the cat out of the bag that I was going to propose that my interview that I'm going to do with Gigi Young, and Gigi's out there. Hey, it's great to see Gigi. Gigi Young has done fantastic work on this subject. And everyone if you're not familiar with her, I'm sure most people in the Ideas Room are, go to gigiyoung.com or see her amazing video series on YouTube. Gigi Young is central. If you want to understand the X series, you have to get to Gigi Young. And one of the things I was going to do is get into that psychic technology aspect with her in our next interview, and bring in the Strader device as well. So cat's out of the bag. What can I say? What do you got?
Najat Madri, could these drones just be a psychological preamble to set up what's coming?
Yeah. See, that's the nature and we can talk about it one way because we're in the ideas room and we understand something about these subjects on some level. But the general public knows very, very little about Apotheum, the UFO file, COG. They're making a good, healthy life for their families, and they're trying to be productive and see where society goes. And they keep running into strange things, like the public congressional hearings where the CIA is trying to force a UFO threat narrative on them, stuff, and they're looking at that and they're wondering, and then, oh, hey, they let out pictures of UFOs. Little things are getting into their subconscious here. But if you can imagine this drone swarm, just as somebody who doesn't know anything about the UFO file, and, the type of reactions that you would have, I mean, here we are on kind of high alert, in a sense, with all the reports and things that we're hearing. And I'm getting all kinds of reports from all over the country about drone sightings. I'm getting emails and messages like you wouldn't believe. But so we're on a kind of high alert status, but those people that are caught unawares in the middle of all this, and then you have this incredible clash also of the technology, and then you have the backgrounds of people like Trump and Kennedy, and the whole X-Protect aspect, developing the breakaway technology in the background. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But I think that the drone swarms are to create data mining for these deeper groups to see if they can pull off a UFO threat. That's what I think they're ultimately for. And I think because they're ultimately for that, they represent a dangerous escalation towards that. And so I think that's where we sit with it right now. Yes, what do you got?
Lason River says, wouldn't people, like most in the ideas room, sense when the real thing is happening? I think that we have a lot more discernment than we used to, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, also it depends, who it changes. People are very changeable. And sometimes they're really tuned in. Sometimes they're tuned out. Sometimes they're thinking about other things. And we just had a major op played off against us in the whole world with the COVID operation. And it's impacted so many people's lives, and that's being unraveled. And they're talking about, preemptively pardoning Fauci for all of his crimes. We are in this period where these things are happening and they are real. And so it is a strange time to be, alive and living in the middle of this incredible, psyop after psyop. And they used to do the psyops and they used to kind of spread them out a little bit more, as Professor Scott was saying, hey, they used the Doomsday Network in JFK, and they also used it in 2001. Well, that's a 40-year span there. This group, they keep on keeping on. And it's interesting because even though they've been found to do a number of very, very highly illegal things, especially the Central Intelligence Agency, they've never really been made to pay for anything. I mean, they had a few slap on the wrist moments if you go back to the 1970s. And they got some other slap on the wrist moments during the whole torture thing after Iraq. But, they've been allowed to grow. They have their own Air Force. They tried to participate in the impeachment of a president that they didn't like in Trump. They tried to lay down the terms and convince that administration to assassinate Julian Assange. They had CIA people at the ready to do it. So there's no reform in the Central Intelligence Agency. It hasn't happened. I do think that the person that Trump is putting in charge of the CIA can change the culture there. I think ultimately what should happen is the records should come out dealing with the President Kennedy's assassination and the UFO file aspect. And it should, by those things coming up, it should kind of blow up the influence of the CIA and blow up the influence of that X-Protect group and bring it to a different level. And we should replace that entire structure. But that's a huge kind of covert war that goes on in the background around this, and that's what we cover in this program on a regular basis. I want to say one thing I like about your question, which is it goes to the everyday aspect of just a person reading about this. And, I mentioned it casually to a fast food worker and just to see if they had heard anything about it. And the person was so freaked out at the thought of it. They hadn't heard anything about it, but they were so sort of flipped out and flummoxed by it that I think it is that type of data that they're looking for on that level. And they want to see if they can pull this off. And I don't know if they're getting the kind of feedback that they want on this. But I will say the clash is obvious in the shouting of the incoming president against the blank delivery of the Pentagon spokesman. That's a clash that shows us exactly where the conversation is on a deep level. And I think Trump is an excellent poker player in that sense, which is he's raising the thing. He's saying, well, if you don't want to talk about it, then shoot him down, but you got to do one or the other. There is no third way. And I think that's a good way to approach it. But at the same time, he's not in power yet. That is a 5 or 6 week turnaround. So there's a weird void, and we're in that void. They're also taking advantage of people as the holidays are kicking in. And we've seen them do this before. As a matter of fact, they launched the whole TTSA phony New York Times article and all those things back on December 17th of 2017. So, they like this period of time. They like that winter solstice period. Yes, that's an occult piece.
Okay, I have a bundle for you. Scarlet Fire. Drones do not need lights. So what are they showing us? New. Unlike other drones, these drones have no heat signature. John D. No heat signature means advanced tech. Anti-gravitic. Tessa 1111. Alien or paperclip tech. And We Came as Lions. DJ, could the drones be living AI?
Well, they're advanced drones. That much I think is obvious. And what we're seeing and what we're hearing about being seen are drones, not traditional UFOs, but drones that look like, kind of advanced, larger versions of the drones that we see flown around. There is a breakaway X-Tech piece that comes up when we're talking about these things. So they're right in that corridor of having the advanced technology and looking for ways to roll it out. For example, they could roll out a drone swarm like this, say, we don't know where it's coming from, and introduce their high-end, not UFO killer, but this other drone killer to take it out. For me, it seems like the operation is larger than just the promotion of a military product. I will say this, that what intrigued me the most, there's always going to be variations in the advancement and what they're using, but what advanced me the most, or what grabbed my attention the most, was when the Apotheum style effects of, the grid going down or having a blackout in that area, or those people missing time when they were looking at drones, is very unusual, which I wonder if part of this isn't taking our technology and mixing it with their technology. That's something I think that could show up in the middle of all this. It's also very interesting to me that the traditional kind of UFO field missed the boat immediately on this and blew it off, actually, for the first few days before, hopping on it in a kind of a marketing fashion. So I think what's interesting about this is it shows the weakness in the UFO study field and how that field really is has seen its best days, and that something new needs to come out of that doesn't deal with the counterintelligence phony narratives, that doesn't deal with the false UFO threat, that a whole different understanding around the UFO file, what it is, what they've been keeping, what the secrets are all about, and how that has a crisscross with genuine geopolitical powers. And it's funny because over the years I've said, the deep state researchers won't deal with the UFO people. And the UFO people don't have the depth of the deep state researchers. So when you study things like the deep state, like Professor Scott has and others, you understand government power. You understand how assassination is utilized. Assassination is a crucial tool. So if you move that understanding into the UFO file aspect, then you start to understand things on a whole different level. That's where the X protect, X share understanding that I've brought forward comes out of. It's from dealing with both fields, the deep state and the UFO field. The deep state researchers, who are actually the good, hardcore researchers, they understand how the government works, they understand the details, they understand how it affects the geopolitical structure for decades. Think very lowly of UFO researchers. And UFO researchers don't, in general, have that kind of depth. But the UFO researchers have a very interesting advantage in one sense, which is they understand that there is a UFO file. So if you could bring that massive knowledge of the deep state, researchers over into understanding the UFO file piece, you'd have a whole different understanding, I think, of how human civilization is unfolding right now. So that's a very interesting thing. And it's quite interesting when somebody like Alex, for example, and when he and I do a show, because he has such a myriad deep understanding of the deep state and a myriad of facts around these things. But when he's opened himself up to the UFO file aspect, and when I'm coming in based around the UFO COG piece, then we really connect, and that whole audience hears that. That's the types of conversation. See, that ricochets right out of the ideas room in that sense. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is UFO Apotheum Nation, COG drone operation takeover. We're taking your questions. We're going to take a couple more, and then I'm going to read something about the position of these drones. And then I also want to remind you that I'm going to be hosting. I did a show with Alex today. We had a great time talking about COG and the UFO file, going deep. Going really deep on it. And I'm going to host 2 hours of InfoWars on next Thursday. And of course, it's going to be about the UFO file. And that is Thursday at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to bring in a lot of very, very, very interesting facts there for you. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, we're going to see you next Friday as well. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you're new here, is to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, and it keeps us in touch. It will let you know about the extraordinary things we have coming up for you on the X series. And that means amazing episodes, crucial interviews that you're going to need, potent information. There's a lot of stuff, and I don't like to criticize any other researchers, so I won't. But there's a lot of fluff going on right now, and the junk conspiracy is running high, and that whole, it's very important that with the JFK records coming out, that the junk conspiracy is not allowed to push that information over a cliff, because with the JFK records coming out, the Aerospace UFO connection will come out of that. It'll help us to understand where groups and entire underground black ops projects and the apparatus for it come from. But if people get hung up, and if you hear, the kind of Candace Owens of the world just saying, oh, Israel, did JFK and 9/11 and everything else, so forget about the deep state, just concentrate on this one little thing over here. Or if you see somebody else just saying, well, the Masons did everything, or the Jesuits did everything. This is the nature of junk conspiracy. It doesn't work like that. Nothing ever gets narrowed down like that. There are coalitions and a coalescence of interests that get together to do these things. And it requires that type of a network. And when you're getting into how aerospace works, there's a great deal about aerospace we know nothing about because it's been held back from us. That's where the issue goes. And we need to keep that in mind as we're surrounded in a sea of junk conspiracy, versus the real thing. When I started doing Dark Journalist, I laid it out this way. You know, you had the official story. So say in 9/11, hey, 19 hijackers with box cutters took down the entire American air apparatus and air defense network. And, they were able to do that, take the country to its knees, even though the country had been preparing for war with a nuclear power in the Soviet Union for years and years, and had expected, had contingency plans for a nuclear exchange with Russia. No, a bunch of box cutter guys could get on there and take the entire air defense system down. That's the official story. The secondary story, which by the media would be called conspiracy theory as a derogatory term, was put forward by professors, researchers, writers who saw there's something wrong with that official story. No, there's not a lone gunman in the Kennedy assassination. That's ridiculous. And that's where, the dark journalism aspect comes in. Then there's the third one. And the third one is often put out by the same people protecting that official narrative. The third level is junk conspiracy. That's where you get things in the Kennedy assassination, like the driver did it.
Jackie did it.
Yeah. Anything that can throw you off and make you think, that's too far out. I'm going to go back to the official version because it's safer. It obfuscates. That's the thing that's played out over and over again. And that's where you get, in the case of the drone thing, hey, they're Iranian drones. Or as we know in the Thomas Crooks situation, they were trying to put it out there that, Crooks is a lone gunman. And their backup was, there was a contract, Iran put out a contract on Trump and all the rest of it. This is how they operate. You have to be able to spot the junk conspiracy without throwing out the real thing. That's crucial. That's dark journalism. And if you do that, you have access to the entire gambit of reasons and explanations, and it's easier to navigate. But when you get a lot of marketing stuff, around junk conspiracies, and when they take things out of context, and you just get people going into it for the kind of click aspect of it, that's junk conspiracy, and there's tons of it. But unfortunately, sometimes you get some very, very big, media personalities pushing that. And it's interesting because, the official version and the official mainstream media, they tell enough lies without all the junk conspiracy. So we don't need the junk conspiracy on top of it. But very often you're going to find it's generated by the same group. Yes.
Okay, another bundle. David told me that, DJ, this Epirus drone killer company is owned by an aerospace company that also builds large drones. Also, their ownership points to Northrop Grumman. Betty Bobo says, Jim Garrison said, aerospace contractors. And Nena says, me thinks there may be a lot more underground U.S. bases in New Jersey than you guys actually know about.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Monmouth has that history, and it's connected with Blue Book, and it's connected with the development of exotic technology. So it's interesting that all these sightings are happening there, and that Netflix bought 300 acres right on top of where that Monmouth base was. One thing that grabbed me in those questions was about Jim Garrison. It's very important, I think, from a historical point of view, to think of it this way. Garrison, of course, is the New Orleans DA who prosecuted the only murder case in the JFK assassination. And his conclusion is shown by someone who ran Ramparts magazine. When I was reading his autobiography, I came across the fact, Warren Hinkle, that he had this whole association with Garrison. And Garrison was calling him up, trying to give him information during the trial of Clay Shaw and all the obfuscation he was getting. He thought his life was in danger, and he said he wanted to get some things on the record with Hinkle, who was running this kind of alternative news. It was sort of like what Rolling Stone used to be. It's this alternative thing that covered pop culture but was very edgy politically. Now Rolling Stone is a joke. But it's really wild because what he says, Hinkle didn't want to deal with Garrison. in fact, he was afraid that he would become trailed by CIA people and all the rest. And he tried to kind of, stay away from them. But he kept saying, tell him that I'm on a break or whatever, whenever he would call. But he went into his own mailroom, and Garrison knew the number in the mailroom and got him on the phone and said, I know this is a security breach and all the rest of it, but I'm going to tell you that we've been thinking about the Kennedy assassination all wrong. Actually, this whole thing about Texas oilmen and all the rest of it, fine, it's fine that got out there, and the whole thing about Cubans and all the rest. He said, but what we've learned is that it's the aerospace wing of the military-industrial complex. In that shadowy corridor between aerospace and the intelligence groups, that's who coordinated and put up the funding and all the rest of it for the assassination of President Kennedy. And it's a good reason for it, because all their plans of dominance came from the idea of dominating things from space that are on the ground. And when you move out of that, if you have your whole plans around it, and this guy, Kennedy, President Kennedy, is talking with his Russian counterpart and saying, I want to share the UFO file with you. We'll both go to the moon together, no space race. It's a whole different paradigm. No Cold War, and all the rest of it. And the group inside of NASA and the aerospace group, it's crucial to understand them because they've never relinquished that role. Lockheed Martin, they're in charge of Antarctica, deep role in our space program, Boeing, and all the rest of it. So that whole piece about aerospace dominance of our political system has never been brought to bear. But there's the guy, long, long, long before Dark Journalist, there's the guy who prosecuted the Kennedy case and said that was his conclusion. So that's a lot to think about. Think about it. And right after that case, of course, the 1970 version of WikiLeaks came out, and it was the Torbett document. What did it have inside there? It had Defense Industrial Security Command, DISC. And DISC was the group that protected the UFO file. And it involved, and it listed as members people like Roy Cohn, and it listed as members people like von Braun and all the rest of it. This thing was explosive, and people didn't understand it because they didn't understand the advanced aspects of aerospace. Well, what did Roy Cohn go on to do, after the Torbett document came out? He was President Trump's political mentor. He's the one who helped him get Trump Tower. He's the one who helped him get casinos. He was the man in the middle. He knew where all the deep state bodies were buried. And Cohn was certainly a swamp creature. He didn't exist with ethics or whatever, but he could get things done, and Trump wanted to get things done in that period. So Trump coming in to the political spectrum, he's got the aerospace aspect through his uncle, but he has Roy Cohn's aerospace aspect and deep state aspect. Those are the crucial things when you talk about Trump to understand his level of knowledge. He's got very deep tabs on the deep state part. Last two questions.
Last
Miss
two
Olivia.
questions.
You got it.
Oh, man. Well, I guess there are a lot of new people in the audience
Excellent.
today. And Esoteric369 says, can we review what Apotheum is, please, Mr. DJ?
Thank you, Esoteric. Absolutely. Apotheum fundamentally is the reality distortion physics that is embedded in this advanced X technology. It matches with what happens during a UFO encounter. So let's say in 1903 that Tesla developed a certain type of ray, and that information is in that classified UFO file, and that is the actual X technology. Well, in 1948, there's the Aztec UFO crash. And when they send these scientists in to study the crash, which is a largely intact craft, which is very different from other crash retrievals like Roswell was all over the place. By the way, there's hieroglyphs in all of these crashes, if you dig deep enough. Well, those scientists, when they go in, they can only stay in that craft. They learned quickly they can only stay in that craft for about 20 minutes max. because when they're in that craft environment, they suffer ill health effects. They see things that aren't there, or are they there? They see their own future. They see dead relatives who have passed on. So Apotheum creates this whole, the effect that takes place, the reality effect distortion that takes place is dramatic for a regular average person. I think there's a pinch of it in Kubrick's 2001 movie, because when you see that whole kind of chakra sequence and the human, riding in the spaceship through this incredible chakra system, you look at that astronaut and you think, this astronaut is barely advanced enough to do this. I think that Apotheum thing, it shows up again and again. Part of it is a mystery, by the way. I've been able to catalog what the symptoms are and to understand that as a kind of physics, even as a torsion style physics, it warps reality. But that's what you can start to say about it. And some of the things, as I've mentioned, invisibility, time lapses. I'll never forget that case. If you look at, there's a great case of Apotheum where there's a very respected Japanese commercial pilot, and he is flying over Alaska, and there are all these radio communications with him back and forth. And he's looking down at this craft, and the craft is as big as 2 football fields, and it's following him all the way. And it's beneath him, and he's looking down at it, he's describing it. He looks down, he describes it. He looks down, he describes it. And at a certain point, he says, "Oh, wait, I can see through it." So, this thing's in reality. It's out of reality. I can see through it. It's coming in here from somewhere else. It has the ability to disappear, apparently, or be transparent. Some people who were involved as witnesses in the Phoenix Lights had the same type of reaction. So what I did is I collected all those different effects, and the term that I use for them is Apotheum, because everything from missing time to the fact that when a saucer lands somewhere, if a craft lands, nothing ever grows there again, to the fact that lightning shows up out of nowhere. There's all these incidents of people getting struck by lightning when UFOs are around, to the disturbance of electrical grids and blackouts, sometimes large-scale blackouts. But this warping in of a different type of reality, that exists in a UFO encounter, and it also exists in that type of Tesla technology. So they're both, the X technology sits there inside of that UFO file. They both produce this Apotheum effect, which I believe, if you get into that deep level of X Protect and the groups that protect this information for national security purposes, etc., it appears to me that that's why the level of secrecy is higher than the nuclear secrecy. Not because it's aliens, but because it has the ability to render reality as a non-factor. So, I remember reading about the whole thing with CERN. We've done a number of shows on the Hadron Collider. One of the effects that the Hadron Collider that CERN built created was this ability to open up dimensions. And at first, you heard rumors about it, and then people were like, it's ridiculous, that's not happening. And then at a certain point, they said, well, we're going to do a test to see if we can communicate with other dimensions. So they already had been doing it. So particle acceleration, there are certain types of technologies that bring us into other realms. And that's really kind of, I think, the heart of this Apotheum idea. And, I did a whole entire documentary called The Apotheum UFO File, and it's for you there on my channel. And we just did it, I think, about 6 months ago. Yes.
James Clements, if these drones are what they're letting us see, imagine what they have that they're not showing us.
I think about that, there was a guy I spoke to. He passed away, but he was a filmmaker, and he was hired by the Nixon administration to do a documentary on UFOs. They were going to release UFO information. It was just before Watergate. And they sent him in to the Pentagon, and they gave him carte blanche. They instructed the Pentagon, show him around, show him real UFO sightings and all the rest of it. he made a version of his documentary, and they chopped out everything that he did, except for, he said that they did include one of the actual craft that he saw. And they did all these weird things with it. Like they have Burgess Meredith and why can't I think of the Twilight Zone guy's name? What is his name?
Which one?
Rod Serling. He's doing voiceover on it. They did this incredible chop job on it, and I think called UFOs Past and Present. They released it a bunch of different ways. But while he was making it in the Pentagon, they had these military guys hooked up to what were TVs in the 1970s with electrodes. And they were told, you know, think of the Eiffel Tower, think of the Eiffel Tower, think of the Eiffel Tower. And the Eiffel Tower would appear on the screen. So they already had that technology back there in 1973. So this idea, one of the things I've put across, and it brings me into a Steiner thing, but I think the social media networks and the technology that they have can now read our minds. And I think that they're going to roll that out. And so things are going to get quite fantastic. But it's very interesting. There's a prediction inside of Rudolf Steiner's work where he talks about the problem with the advent of the Ahrimanic technology. And one of the problems with the advent of that is that he said, you know, Ahriman is going to give everyone clairvoyance that they would, you know, under normal circumstances would have spent 10 years to develop it. You know, he's just going to roll out, you know, he's going to make you an instant yogi and all the rest of it. And he said, but the problem is everyone is going to have their own different version of clairvoyance. And that basically it's going to set up this situation of the war of all against all, where nobody's vision matches up with anyone else's. And so there's kind of a danger to this technological setting off of the silver cord psychic aspect deep inside humanity. That's something that is sitting there latent and waiting to be developed. And there's tons of mystery school literature about developing that. But in the present society, there's a slight, you know, there's only a slight interest in what a human being can actually do. You know, they're more obsessed with them on a totally different superficial level. But what a person can do and what their psychic abilities are latently designed for is an extreme place, but it's also a huge vulnerability. So, you know, human beings in that sense are malleable because they're malleable to bring out all these incredible qualities that they have, but they're also malleable to be turned into something or to have their psychic faculties exploited. So we have to be aware of the fact that they've been working on this stuff for a long time, and it seems like they want to use things. They're not concerned with the ethics of using them. They're concerned with the advantage of using them. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to give it to Kontiki Man. Any
Excellent.
chance on circling back to the fact that the Robertson panel and the Washington flyby happened after Truman's shoot them down order?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, I want to say this about the Robertson panel. An eyewitness account in the Robertson panel is J. Allen Hynek. And what does he say? He said, well, they called me in there. I had the credentials for it. I was an astronomer. They sat him down in a cold theater. It was very uncomfortable. They showed him the best films of UFOs you can imagine. This is 1952. And he said these various physicists and other people who were involved in it would come up and shout in his ear, regardless of how good that footage was. That's the planet Venus. That's a flock of birds. That's this, that's that. And they would really freak him out. And he said it was so rude. And the environment was so odd, this cold theater. But the footage itself was incredible. And so this disconnect between what he was seeing and what they were yelling at him struck him as very strange. Well, if you go back into the list of people who were involved in the Robertson panel, Lloyd Berkner, they say basically it was actually Berkner's panel. And Lloyd Berkner is the subject of the documentary we just did. If you want to dive deep into someone. He was there in Antarctica with Byrd. He was there running the Robertson panel. He set off the International Geophysical Year to study the ionosphere in Antarctica. And he was the person that President Kennedy was going to meet at the Trade Mart when he was assassinated. It's all there in JFK, the final speech. What I will say about Berkner is that I don't think that he was an ex-Protect character. I think he was an ex-Share character who operated around this ex-Protect world. And in 1966, it's James McDonald who goes to him and says, I have all this UFO info. You did the Robertson panel. I saw the real one. They released a false one to the public. And Berkner said, of course they did. You know, it's the CIA ran it. And he said, I need to meet you, and we need to set up a new thing. I have an opening with LBJ, and I think we can do this. So Berkner meets him in a house in Dallas. And one of the people who are an aide to LBJ are there. So, you know, they tape a conversation for 4 hours, and McDonald has those tapes. He brings them back with him. Berkner will go from that a few weeks later to a think tank in Washington, D.C., and go into a fast food place, order a hamburger, go upstairs to his think tank, and drop dead of a heart attack. Whatever he heard from McDonald, nobody else was supposed to hear. And I think that they thought with Berkner, well, this guy knows too much. McDonald himself, who was probably the best UFO researcher of his time and the most logical, he's a scientist. You know, he had participated in environmental science papers that are kind of legendary. And 2 years later, he has a gunshot wound and he's blinded by, and his wife goes to visit him in the hospital. She's like, he wasn't depressed. What's going on here? It's a very strange set of circumstances. And then he's, recovering from the whole thing. So she goes home, and then McDonald is found the next day, a highway 5 miles from there, stumbling off the highway, dead. So that whole, route of Berkner, Robertson panel, meeting JFK who gets assassinated, then having this meeting with McDonald in this house, it getting taped, LBJ aide being there, Berkner dies of a heart attack, McDonald, is blinded from this supposedly self-inflicted gunshot wound, and then is found dead. That's all the work of Ex-Protect. There's no question in my mind. That's exactly when people got too close to it. And I think that you'll find people around the early versions of the Philadelphia experiment form a foundation for that as well. You see, it's interesting to me because when we talk about releasing the JFK files, for example, Trump has now pledged with Bobby Kennedy to do that. So that deep state structure is already shuddering over that. But in truth, when you open up those things, you're opening up that aerospace aspect. And that gets you into all of these different things and why the secrecy has existed there in the first place. So we've had a lot, people are more prone to talk about MK Ultra and things now. There's much more openness, for example, to it. But the MK Ultra aspect of, let's say, like John Lennon's shooter, for example, it's not really been brought to the bear. Interestingly enough, that programming is still in there. So technically, Mark David Chapman is still alive in a prison there in upstate New York. If you had enough openness around the whole thing, with his participation, they could probably unlock who set the mechanism up in the first place. Because after all, in the case of Mark David Chapman, the Lennon assassin, how did this guy get, this incredible art collection working as a security guard? How did he travel the world? How was he in Beirut in 1978 when most citizens couldn't even, it'd be like going to North Korea? There's a number of different things about society and the groups that have operated to remove people, whether it's the Central Intelligence Agency, Ex-Protect. And I think what you can do with somebody like Bobby Kennedy working together with Trump is you can declassify it in a way that you can strike at the heart of the groups that are operating this thing in the first place. So, you know, the great outrage of 61 years without knowing who killed President Kennedy because it's locked up in a CIA skiff somewhere, that got revealed, that the CIA has a skiff dedicated just to the JFK assassination. And when they get a new agent who's working around deeper clandestine efforts, they walk them through there. They say, hey, come into the JFK skiff library that we have. This is who really killed President Kennedy. And they walk them through, and this is how it works. That's a paid-for facility. The public pays for that facility with no access to what it is. I mean, that came out. That's a story that came out through the work of Jefferson Morley in September. And it is a headline blaster of a story. It's completely buried. But if you get the JFK files open, you'll start to open up on a dramatic level. The JFK files, in a sense, are the files themselves, but they're symbolic of this secret structure sitting on the public structure. That's been the problem for 61 years. And with that, Miss Olivia, your last question.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Aha.
But David Turbina is killing it tonight. Interesting fact about Monmouth, New Jersey, Operation Moonbounce was done from there. The first terrestrial radio signal sent from Earth to the moon on purpose. Donald Menzel was instrumental.
Wow. Well, I had a wonderful conversation with Stanton Friedman before he passed away. And wow, you know, I would love to see the caliber in the UFO field of somebody like Stanton Friedman again, because it was a totally different world. And when I think about the bozos and, you know, the Corbell and the whole sideshow and the CIA worship, and all those researchers who are at the altar of counterintelligence agents doling out secrets about the UFO file. I think about Friedman because he understood, you know, the limitations of what you could get out of that black world. But he's someone who really took that whole aspect of Menzel for me in a conversation and showed me letters of Menzel writing to President-elect Kennedy and saying, basically, I know all this stuff about the UFO file, by the way. He's the number one debunker of the UFO file in the period. And he's basically saying, I know all this stuff, you know, relating to this aspect of the UFO file, and I can be indispensable. I'm at your service, sir. You know, Menzel is the key player, and what's interesting is the double role that they have to play as the main debunkers while studying it. So it reminds me of what we saw today with somebody like Kirby out there. Debunk, 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 while you're in the background, you know, working this stuff. So Kirby was out there saying, oh, no, there are no drones. It's all your imagination. Those reports are just airplanes. It's the ultimate gaslighting situation. But it is interesting because Menzel, who was here at Harvard, he lived a double life. And it was determined later, oh, the CIA used him as a spy for all of these various situations. So his double life came out. But in the middle of it was that weird dance trying to get JFK to accept him as basically one of his MJ-12 advisors while being the public face of debunking. You know, it's kind of the Neil deGrasse Tyson. Mm-hmm. By the way, that whole thing about Elon and, you know, his openness and all these various things, his credibility takes a tremendous hit when he doesn't talk about the UFO file and dismisses it because, you know, anyone who's researched it on some level knows there's something else going on. So the guy who has all the information from satellites, et cetera, it obviously points to the fact that this guy's muzzled. And we have to keep that in mind. So you can take the good with the bad with somebody like that. You know, they can do what they can do. But again, around the whole piece of the drone thing with his Skynet piece, Starlink could be looking down at that and saying, yeah, the drones are doing this, 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 and this. He's not touching that with a 10-foot pole. It's very indicative of how deep that operation goes. And with that, Miss Olivia, we're going to be keeping a very close eye on the New Jersey drone swarm and everything that comes out of it. And I wanted to convey a kind of seriousness about what's going on with that today, but I do want everyone to keep on a positive, trip about it, because I feel like sometimes these things, when they bring them up to a brink, they actually end up exposing themselves more. And I think in the case of the Biden administration, they certainly did that. But I do think it represents an escalation. So my analogy earlier about the clocks and the scientists who watch the doomsday clock moving closer to nuclear doomsday, if we're looking at this, it moving closer to that UFO threat narrative being used for emergency powers, there's no question that that hand moved much closer. So I wanted to convey that, and I will be bringing forward information about this program that's being carried out. And it's my promise to you that we have kept the closest possible watch on the counterintelligence narrative trying to force a false UFO CIA version of that instead of the real thing. And so we'll continue to do that. And then the drone swarm story is a huge part of it. And it seems to be metastasizing across the country. So we have a Apotheum nation going on at the moment, hence the title of the episode. Miss Olivia, your super chatters are up.
I will read them in a minute. I just want to say Jimmy Lyle Kennemer, who we were all praying for last week, is doing so much better.
Excellent.
And says, DJ, I love how you over-deliver. I hope I don't sound too much like an old school press agent. So God bless you. And
Jimmy, we're happy that you're doing better. That's fantastic news. That's great news. And that's the way to go out on an up note, as it were. So I'll do some shout outs after you.
Okay. Alarminine Bay, Eurythmia's Fun, Occult Band, Thomas Ball, Fulcanelli, Just a Girl, Wolfgang McCarthy, Jay Parsons, MDDC, Futant Collective, Jessica Rodriguez, The Bikini Truther, AB Test, Roosevelt Media News, Diona Clendenin, Doyle Wayne, Amarillo Gunrunners, Barry 7676, Funny Times, Tracy Klatke, Robert Scott, Sick of the BS, Stephen Spencer D.O., Descat Brock, Empire of Light, Mark Lingerfeld, The Mac, James Clements, C.A. Beverforden, Bradley Crandall, Debbie McAdoo, Erica Swenson-Elliott. Thank you so much for your generous super chats tonight.
Wow, that's incredible. And to all our supporters, thank you. It helps us to keep going. And we rely on your support, being an independent media channel. We will be back at you next week. And before I go any further, I'm actually going to do some shout outs for you guys. And for those of you who joined me today when I was interviewed by Alex, that was a blast, and great comments all around. And I want to mention again, I'll be doing Alex's show. I'm going to be hosting it for 2 hours on InfoWars, which is great, next Thursday at 1 o'clock Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. What a marvelous night for a moon dance, says Roger Z. You got it right. Adam Hugo. Look at the Diddy case. Indeed. Tormina recently said if there are aliens floating around, he would know it. Yeah, sure. He knows quite well, but he can't say anything because he's muzzled. Let's see what we got here. Great show and congrats, DJ. Sick of the BS. I like it. Wolfgang McCarthy. Gaslighting at its finest. Indeed, sir. Indeed. Scarlet Fire, I approve this message. Night all. Wow, fantastic. Blazing River. Elon with 12 children.
And how many baby mamas?
Excellent point. Congress must hear real testimony, Daniel. Yeah, that's really true. We've been getting the false stuff. But see, even if you have, Burchett, Congressman Burchett, and Anna Paluna Luna, and now it's Nancy Mace. She's been all over this, right? But they don't start in from a good position because they don't know a whole lot about the topic to start with. This is the nature of the problem. And I've sent them information. We'll see what they pay attention to in the grand scheme of things. Gigi Young says, I felt secondhand embarrassment when I saw the Ezekiel wheel drone. Wow. Yeah. They're going for it, right? And there's a great Atlantis story about Ezekiel's wheel, which comes out of the Casey readings. Good job, DJ and Miss Olivia and friends. Wow. And I love this because it gives us an idea of the Atlantean technology. They're asking Casey, who's blowing everybody's mind, talking about these craft in 1925. And they're saying, well, if the Atlanteans had all these advanced ships and things like that, can you tell us what they were like, And Casey says, yeah, they're exactly like what Ezekiel described, but that was a much later date. So the Atlanteans back there, 11,000 BC and, beyond. And here's Ezekiel, what is it, 1500 BC? I don't trust the dating in the grand scheme of things, but somewhere around 1500 BC. Somebody kept that technology for 10,000 years because Ezekiel is seeing Atlantean tech. He's seeing an Atlantean ship show up. So that might help open up some idea about where this technology could be coming from in the first place, right? Astara, it's great to see you out there. Somebody said something about Jay-Z, but I could not give you a good answer. Drones easily shot down? Excellent point. Of course they would be under ordinary circumstances. You're not dealing with a truthful group giving us the information in the first place. Let's see. Esther Taylor, Pono, Ralph Smart, Night All. Wow, fantastic. What a great ideas from incredible questions. And it was great to have so many of you here with us tonight. And
this was the largest crowd we've ever had.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, many more to come. DJ hosting Big Moves. Let's go. Astara. Thank you, sir. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. Wait till you see what I have cooked up for that audience next week. And then I'll be back with you guys next Friday. That's going to be something else. A lot may come up because of the volatility of this drone swarm situation and all the things, the implications. There may be some special reports in between now and then. And I think you should pay attention to all the kind of key researchers that we've pointed out as well. And, I've pointed out Gigi Young, for example. Become acquainted with that information if you aren't already. And if you are, then get behind the work that she's doing, support what she's doing. And she's an incredible friend and ally to the X series and to us here. DJ and Olivia, thanks for another great show, Roosevelt Media News. Thank you. Thank you, Roosevelt. It's great to have you out there. Najat, have a great night, X-Fam. Indeed. Everybody should have a fantastic evening. Let's see. Esoteric 369. It's great to see you out there. Let's see. Got the Alex Jones show queued up as soon as this ends. I hope you enjoy it.
A lot of people were confused as to where to watch it.
Just watch it on X. It's it's at the top of his stream on X, and it's all over the place. It's on Rumble. It's on madmaxworld.com, which is his video station. But yeah, right on his X thing, the whole video is right there at the top of his X feed, and it's pinned, so you can't miss it. It's all there. And I've also put it in our X. So if you go to Dark Journalist on X, it's right there. Bingo. You can't miss it. Atlantis Rising is out there. And there's some deep Atlantis shows that will be coming up in January, provided the UFO attack invasion doesn't surface. I'll have time to tell you about the Two-Eye Stone. Stay potent, DJ. I like it. Fantastic. You got the idea. The information has to be potent. Entertaining? Yes. We get a lot of entertaining stuff out there. It's great, fantastic. But potency is crucial. And what you have right now is a bunch of very low potency information floating around. So being potent, I remind myself to go deeper with the information to be potent. And I think it's an important requirement for this. And I am glad when I run across other people that are doing things on that potent basis because, like the conversation I think with Alex today is very potent. And, there's a lot there for people to work with. Let's see who else you got. Spinster Mountain. Tina Boric. FAA said it's a federal offense to shoot drones, I think is what she means. There are a number of places where it's illegal to do that. Absolutely. And I don't recommend it in any case. I think it's the government that should be taking them down and us demanding of the government to do that, in fact. Let's see who else we got. Viking and Drumstick, Terry Brooks. Wow, incredible. What a great crew tonight. And I know Kate's out there. It's fantastic to see you. Blazing River. No, Arthur McGonnell. How does the vacuum of space not suck us all out into the infinite void, please, Mr. Journalist? It's a good question. That's one of those creation miracles, isn't it? Yeah. I remember that whole thing about the Van Allen belt, too. Well, it goes deep. That's a deep one. I appreciate it. And James Clements, this is DJ, Olivia, Gigi. You all rock. Thank you, sir. Much obliged. We will see you all next week. And there's Merry Christmas from Sammy. Well, Merry Christmas to you, sir. I'm sure we'll have a lot of Merry Christmas messages for everyone coming up. And we'll see you all next week. We'll keep a very close eye on the drone situation and everything. If anyone has information that they want to parlay to me in relation to that or anything else, it's admin@darkjournalist.com. That's what I've been getting email messages on. Of course, it's darkjournalist.com for the newsletter, and it's Dark Journalist on X if you want to watch the Alex show. We'll see you all next week, first Thursday on InfoWars, and then Friday right here at 8 p.m., and we can't wait to see you. And, of course, it says end broadcast, but
never really ends.
It never really ends. Thank you, Miss Olivia. Bravo. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and a great president who was there trying to save the world. And you know what? I think he did. So now we're going to save his memory, I guess. That's the next step. So never let it be forgot. Have a great night, everyone.
God bless.